Li Mei's Wuxia whispers. Chapter 365. Lin Xiao looked down at her with a confused face and asked curiously, "What man? Why do you want to find a man? Tell me what's going on first." Hearing her question, little Man replied, Yes, it's the person you like, Aya. He's also here to help little Man level up together. Mama has to come with a human of a different gender, or Mama, you don't have to find the person you like, you can also find someone else," not knowing why little Man's words. Lin Xiao had a bad feeling. You mean this time besides me we have to find another person to come in and go into the lake together? Yes, little Man answered. And then? Lin Xiao asked. And then? What then? Little Man asked her in confusion. Then we go down together. How can we help you level up? Lin Xiao asked her curiously. Little Man doesn't know. Little Man will know what to do when the time comes. Little Man didn't give her an accurate answer. This made Lin Xiao feel very strange. Why did she have to find a man to come in? That meant she and that man had to go into the water together and then face each other naked? It really didn't feel good. What did little Man want to do? Mama, little Man wants Tiny Tot. Quickly let Tiny Tot into play at this time. Little Man really wanted Lin Xiao to bring Tiny Tot into play and didn't seem to care about other things for the time being. Lin Xiao looked at her strange look and said, Now that you look like this, will you scare Tiny Tot? Little Man swung the vines on her head around and replied, No, last time little Man told her that little Man can transform. Lin Xiao looked at her speechlessly. She didn't think that this guy had already hinted to Tiny Tot last time. Okay then, wait for me. Lin Xiao carried her to the sofa in front of the small space and prepared to go out and bring Tiny Tot into play. But when she saw her appearance, Lin Xiao suddenly stopped. Are you cold like this? Do you want me to give you some clothes to wrap you up? Little Man sat on the sofa, swinging her little legs and hair as she replied, I'm not cold. All right then. Just you wait. Lin Xiao stood up, turned around and left the space. As soon as Lin Xiao left the space, everyone looked at her. He only saw her carrying Xiao Budian and the gray rabbit in Xiao Budian's arms before disappearing in a flash. What's wrong with her? Du Yuanxing asked. Yuan Tianxing shook his head. How would I know? Du Yuanxing said. She brought the little princess inside. What if Leader Wu doesn't see the little princess when he comes to pick her up? Yuan Tianxing looked at him with a smile and said, What do you want to do? You can just say that you were brought into the space by Miss Lu. Du Yuanxing. Oh, Long Qingying glanced at him and said, Why are you thinking so much? Miss Lu won't do anything to the little princess. What are you worried about? Why did she only realize now that this Du Yuanxing's brain was sometimes missing something? The last time he went on a mission he looked quite normal. After Lin Xiao brought Xiao Budian in, she put her on the sofa. She pointed to little Man next to her and asked, Do you still know her? Xiao Budian was already used to being brought in and out of the space by Lin Xiao. After being brought in by Lin Xiao, she naturally wanted to look towards the lake. However, when she suddenly heard Lin Xiao's words, she turned around and saw a pair of big eyes looking at her. Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly lit up, and she quickly slid down from the sofa. Then she leaned towards Little Man. Little Man sat there motionlessly, just swinging her little legs. Then when Wu Yueling came closer, she put her hair on Xiao Budian's hand. Then the two little guys looked at each other and smiled. Li Mei's Wuxia whispers that Xiao Budian's face rarely showed any expression, but now Lin Xiao found that the expression on her face had already changed a lot. Especially when she stayed with herself, Little Man or the gray rabbit, her body was always brimming with a very happy mood. Lin Xiao knew that Wu Yueling liked Little Man very much, because she had already seen the smile on Wu Yueling's face unconsciously. She didn't know whether she had noticed it or not. She asked, Xiao Budian, when can you talk to us? Lin Xiao felt that the child's autism seemed to have improved a lot. Or was it because the child only accepted her and Little Man in her heart? Xiao Budian looked back at Lin Xiao and just opened her little mouth. But she didn't make a sound, and then turned back to play with Little Man. Little Man pulled her to sit on the sofa next to her with Rot Tan. And then the two little guys didn't know what they were discussing. At least Lin Xiao felt that these two little guys were discussing something very important. The gray rabbit seemed to feel that no one was playing with it, and it was very familiar with the atmosphere and the environment here. It immediately jumped from Xiao Budian's side to the strawberry field. It had eaten cabbages for many days, and it wanted to eat the vegetables here. The food outside was so bad. What Lin Xiao didn't know was that the two little guys were discussing little man. I want to find a man for Mama, Xiao Budian. I also want to find a wife for Papa. Little man looked at Xiao Budian in surprise and asked, Then what do you think of my mama? Do you like it? Xiao Budian nodded and said with some confusion, Zombie sister is very good. I like it. But I don't know if Papa will like it. Little man narrowed her big green eyes and said, Bring your Papa here and let me see, I will make him like my mama. Hee. Saying that, little man suddenly smiled mischievously. Xiao Budian looked at her blankly with a pair of bright black eyes. Really? How can I make Papa like sister? Little man said to her, You have to call her Mama. I have my own way. Xiao Budian looked at her with some hesitation, and then reluctantly nodded. On the other side, Lin Xiao still didn't know that after she brought Xiao Budian in, she was immediately sold to Xiao Budian by little man. And on the other side, Wu Chongyue, who was happily chasing Yang Chao with Xiao Yunlong, also didn't know that he had been sold by his precious daughter to a little naughty little vine. At this time he and Xiao Yunlong had chased Yang Chao from the inner area to the outer area. Yang Chao's movement speed after transforming was very fast, and he chose to walk in crowded or narrow places. This greatly hindered Wu Chongyue and Xiao Yunlong's attack. Rohi, come at me. If you have the ability, then blow up this entire building. Otherwise, what can you do to me? Yang Chao laughed at Wu Chongyue and the other two as he entered a residential building. Soon there were bursts of screams of fright in the building, which soon turned into screams. Chapter 366. Wu Chongyue rushed over with Xiao Yunlong, listening to the noise in the building with a bad expression. He's starting to eat people, Wu Chongyue said, and immediately rushed into the building in a flash. He knew that these virus-infected psychics, as long as they break through their own energy suppression, they will become like this monster. At the same time, their internal organs and digestive system will also change. They have lost interest in the food of ordinary people, and began to feel hungry for the flesh and blood of living people. When Wu Chongyue and Xiao Yunlong rushed into the corridor, they saw that the ground and walls of the corridor were indeed splashed with a lot of fresh blood. The two of them had a bad feeling and immediately quickened their pace to chase up. At this time Yang Chao's mouth was wide open. He was biting the back of a woman's neck, dragging her body on all fours and quickly leaping up. The woman's body was flung like a rag by his leaping movements, her body from time to time smashing into the corner of the wall. But she could no longer cry out in pain because there was no breath in her nose. Yang Chao bit the back of her neck, his big mouth was dripping with blood. After he dragged the woman up, he seemed to feel that Wu Chongyue and Xiao Yunlong would not come up so quickly. He found an illusion and dragged the woman over, then began to tear her clothes with his hands. Very quickly, he tore the woman's clothes. After Yang Chao tore the woman's clothes, his deformed hands kneaded the woman's chest. Suddenly, he fiercely dug and tore off the woman's two white breasts. Then he took the meatball in his hand and stuffed it into his mouth and chewed. His claws and teeth were dyed red with blood. He chewed the two meatballs in a few bites, then suddenly turned his head and stared in the direction of the stairs. Then he suddenly turned around and ran. Just as he ran less than 2 meters away, a wall suddenly stretched out from the wall next to him, blocking his way. But Yang Chao did not care. He just stopped for a moment, then waved his arm and punched the wall. Originally, with his current strength, he could directly punch a hole in an ordinary wall. However, the wall in front of him was different. After being punched by him, there was not even a crack on the wall. You actually dare to eat people in the base. Yang Chao, you really are a deranged lunatic. Zhou Shihui's voice rang out. Roar. Yang Chao turned his head and wanted to run to the back, but he soon realized that the back was also blocked. He spun around on the spot and laughed in a twisted manner. The 2 pieces of meat on a woman's chest are the most delicious. You guys can also go have a taste, ha ha ha. But before he could finish, a large number of steel rods suddenly shot out from the surrounding walls, heading straight for Yang Chao. Yang Chao darted around in the narrow space, but he did not completely avoid the attacks of the iron rods. His body was pierced by several meter-long steel rods that were as thick as fingers. Roar, he roared anxiously, then stopped and used both hands to grab the steel rod on his body and pulled it out forcefully. Soon the steel rod was pulled out with blood staining it. Suddenly, when he turned his head to grab another one, a steel rod suddenly shot through his head. Yang Chao's entire body was frozen in the same position as he pulled out the steel essence from his body. Then his eyes widened and he slowly collapsed. The two extra walls slowly receded. And then Wu Chengyue, Zhou Shihui, Xiao Yunlong and the others all stood on the other side of the wall. Looking at Yang Chao, who had fallen to the ground with a hole in his head, they walked over. Xiao Yunlong was the first to step forward and cautiously kicked Yang Chao's body. After confirming that the guy was dead, he turned to the others and said, "He's dead. But before he died, he harmed a woman. What should we do with this guy now?" Wu Chengyue looked at Zhou Shihui and said, "Old Zhou, go and arrest all the other accomplices first. I will appease the people." Zhou Shihui nodded, glanced at Yang Chao's body, and turned to leave with a sigh of relief. Wu Chengyue said to Xiao Yunlong, "Cut off his head." Xiao Yunlong waved his hand, and all the steel here floated up and then gathered together. Then it melted and formed a ball. He controlled the metal ball in the air with one hand, while the other hand moved left and right at the metal ball. With his action, the metal ball in front of him was pulled into a sharp blade shape, and the blade flashed a sharp light. Xiao Yunlong pressed down with both hands, and the metal steel blade slashed at Yang Chao's neck with a clang. His head was directly cut off, and a stream of blood gushed out from the cut. Wu Chengyue went to the side of the female corpse and examined the appearance of the female corpse. "She has been infected, although I don't know if she will turn into a zombie. Take care of the body first, keep it to observe the situation later." "Yes." At this time, Xiao Yunlong pointed to Yang Chao's head and asked, "Do you want to take out the crystal nucleus inside?" Wu Chengyue nodded and said, "Take it out. No matter what, he is a 7th level psychic." Xiao Yunlong controlled the steel blade to cut at Yang Chao's head again, and then picked up a piece of steel next to him and stirred it twice in Yang Chao's skull. A crystal nucleus fell out. He picked it up and wiped it on Yang Chao's tattered military uniform, then stood up and handed it to Wu Chengyue. "You keep it, you killed him. The crystal nucleus of course belongs to you." Wu Chengyue did not take it, and after saying a few words, he turned and left. "Bring down the two bodies." "Yes." The surrounding soldiers immediately responded. Because they knew that a victim was attacked and taken away by Yang Chao when they came up, they had prepared white cloth and a shelf. They covered the female corpse with a white cloth and tied her body with a rope. Only then did everyone carry the two corpses downstairs. Xiao Yunlong took the crystal nucleus and glanced at Yang Chao's headless body on the ground, then followed Wu Chengyue down. Wu Chengyue assigned some tasks to Xiao Yunlong to deal with the aftermath as he went downstairs, and then began to appease the panicking people downstairs. At the moment of Yang Chao's death, if Lin Xiao was outside the space, she would certainly be aware. But at this time she was still in the space teaching Little Man to walk. That's right, teaching her to walk. Because Little Man had 6 legs, each of which was as thick as Lin Xiao's thumb, and half a meter long. It was white and tender and looked very cute. But as soon as she stepped on the ground, she did not know how to control her little legs. She could clearly control the mop of hair on her head strand by strand, but she could not control her own roots. When she walked, she did not know which leg to step on first, and then she took 2 or 3 steps at the same time, but the direction was not the same. So the result was that they got tangled together, and then twisted into a ball. Then, Little Man fell down with a paw sound. Chapter 367. Lin Xiao and the little guy silently squatted on the ground and looked at the little man who was lying on the ground and unwilling to get up. "Little man, why can you control your hair but not your legs?" Lin Xiao didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he looked at her. The little man flipped over on the ground and then twisted the vines on her head and her little legs to the side. She put one of the vines on her head on Lin Xiao's hand. Because the little man's legs are roots, this is something that only knows how to stick in the ground and not move. Lin Xiao glanced at the little guy, then turned around and said to the little man, "Even the little guy runs faster than you, quickly stand up." The little man rolled on the ground twice before using the vines on her head to stand up. The little guy looked at her swaying appearance and wanted to go over and help her up. However, he was stopped by Lin Xiao. "Don't go in case she crushes you when she falls down. She's very heavy and will injure you." Lin Xiao looked at the little guy and said. The little guy hesitantly looked at the little man, then looked at Lin Xiao with a very conflicted expression. The little guy stood very steadily, but he wanted her to take 2 steps. First extend one leg, support it, then extend the other. Don't rush, slowly. Extend the second leg, third leg, and yes, just like this. Walk slowly. After teaching for an entire hour, the little man slowly walked. However, she couldn't run because if she ran, her 6 legs would twist together and fall. Shen Yuzhen hid by the door in the small space and peeked her head out. She curiously watched Lin Xiao teach the little man how to walk. She really wanted to come out, but she was very afraid of the little man's aura, so she could only hide there and watch. At the same time, Shen Yuzhen was also very curious as to why little Princess Wu Yueling was also here. Seeing the expression on Wu Yueling's face as she ran around the little man with a slight smile, Shen Yubiao felt even more strange. Wasn't Wu Yueling an autistic child? Why did she look like a normal child now, able to play with others? This was because she heard the little guy quietly tell her that Wu Cheng would come to pick her up soon. While waiting, little man was learning how to walk from Lin Xiao. Little man could now sense all the auras outside the space through Lin Xiaolai. Although the range was not very far, she could only sense all the auras and movements within 100 meters. She couldn't see what they looked like, but she could distinguish between good and bad auras. Therefore, she was not lying when she told Lin Xiao that she could not leave the space. However, there was one thing that she was hiding from Lin Xiao. Although her body couldn't go out, she still had one more thing to hide. But in fact, her vine tentacles could quietly stretch out. But the premise was that she had to grab Lin Xiao's hand and touch her body. Hence, Yuan Tianqing and the rest who were outside the house were dumbfounded, as they looked at the jade-white vine branches that had grown out of nowhere. It was wandering around the house, although it didn't have any intention of attacking them. But why does this vine look so familiar? Where did this come from? The few of them sat on the sofa and stared blankly at the vines, touching them left and right. Then he stretched out his hand and looked around them. At this moment, the door was suddenly pushed open. Xinglu walked in and said excitedly, "The news is back." "Oh, what is this?" Yuan Tianqing shook his head in confusion and said, "I don't know. Don't attack it first. Let's see what it wants to do. It doesn't have any bad intentions." Lin Wenwen looked at Xinglu and the jade-white vine and asked, "What's the situation over there? Is Yang Chao dead?" Xinglu walked over carefully and saw the vine suddenly reaching towards him. He immediately stood still and stared at the vine while answering Lin Wenwen's question. "Dead. I heard that he seemed to have turned into some ugly monster. Even Chief Wu's lightning attack couldn't do any harm to him. In the end, he was killed by another leader in the base and deputy leader Xiao." As he spoke, he looked at Lin Wenwen's short hair curiously, and suddenly felt that he couldn't get used to it. But he didn't say it out loud. Everyone stared at the vine and asked Xinglu, "He can transform?" Little Man stealthily searched around the room, and then retracted her vine tentacles. Soon, it disappeared in front of Yuan Tianqing and the others. Everyone watched as the vines turned transparent piece by piece and then disappeared. Then they breathed a sigh of relief. Du Yuanqing asked, "Is it gone?" Everyone else, "Probably." Du Yuanqing thought for a moment and suddenly said in confusion, "This looks like the vine in the lake in Miss Lu's space." Long Qingying and Lin Wenwen both had a flash of inspiration when he said that. Yuan Tianqing had never seen Little Man's appearance before, so he looked at Du Yuanqing blankly. Xinglu looked around suspiciously. After making sure that there were no strange white vines around, he felt a chill down his spine. Then he breathed a sigh of relief. He said to everyone, "I heard that Yang Chao was secretly doing some zombie virus experiments, and he was using living people in the base to do it. Hundreds of people went missing in the base in the past few months, and now they've all been found. They were all captured by him." Yuan Tianqing and the others looked at him in shock. Lin Wenwen said angrily, "You said he used living people for experiments? What experiments? And secretly capturing people, it can't be anything good." Xinglu nodded and replied, "Yes, that experiment seems to be to extract the zombie virus from the blood of zombies and then dilute it. Then inject it into people's bodies. Ordinary people will die directly, and only psychics can suppress the virus." Yuan Tianqing frowned and asked, "Why did he dilute the virus and inject it into people's bodies?" Xinglu said, It seems that he wants to gain some power. Look at Yang Chao turning into that monster. He's not even afraid of lightning anymore. So only physical attacks can be effective against him. Lin Wenwen thought for a moment and said, so we can only attack him with weapons or machines. Then wouldn't it be enough to give him a bomb? Xinglu nodded and said to her in agreement, yes, if there's a bomb, it can indeed do some damage to him. But he's moving too fast, and if we wanted to throw a bomb at him, he would have already run away. So in the end, Deputy Leader Xiao had to pierce his head with a metal to kill him. Yuan Tianqing remembered that Miss Lu also said that Yang Chao had a level 7 accomplice, so he asked, what about Yang Chao's accomplice? Who is he? Xinglu looked at him and replied, oh, I heard that he's a level 7 metal psychic. But in the end it seemed that the situation wasn't right, so he abandoned Yang Chao and ran away. Everyone exclaimed in surprise, ran away? Chapter 368. Yuan Tianqing asked, isn't he Yang Chao's helper? Why didn't he help? Xinglu shook her head and said, I don't know. Anyway, I heard that he ran away when Leader Wu and the others were besieging Yang Chao. Lin Wenwen's expression was strange. She didn't know whether to laugh and said, is Yang Chao going to die of anger? Xinglu said, if it were me, I would definitely die of anger. Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, so what? Isn't Yang Chao's helper a robber? Robbers aren't trustworthy. This robber definitely won't take the risk for Yang Chao. Lin Wenwen said, maybe it's just that the reward isn't enough for the robber to take the risk. Yuan Tianqing looked at her and nodded. You're right. Then Leader Wu will be busy again. This matter in the base has a great impact on the people. And it's going to be winter soon. Du Yuanqing said with his arms crossed. Lin Wenwen suddenly said, I found that ever since we met Sister Lu, our situation has been getting better. Now that we've received so many supplies, we don't have to worry about surviving the winter. When the others heard this, they also found that the base was being built smoothly. And Miss Lu did find a lot of supplies for them. After Lin Xiao taught Little Man to walk slowly in the space, she sat on the sofa and watched her play with Tiny Tot. Then she sensed outside and happened to hear the news that Xinglu brought back. I'll go out for a while. You two play. Little Man, don't fall and crush Tiny Tot. If she gets hurt, I'll come in and spank you. She looked at Little Man and said, then turned around and disappeared. She didn't worry about Little Man because she knew that even if Little Man fell, she would fall in the direction where Tiny Tot wasn't. Little Man swung the vines covering her head over and over again. After seeing Lin Xiao go out, she slowly dragged Tiny Tot to the sofa. Then she held the sofa and walked around it in circles. Her speed was comparable to that of a tortoise. Wu Yueling also quietly followed behind her, accompanying Little Man to walk around in circles. Little Man used a vine to pull Wu Yueling, then said to her, why hasn't your father come yet? I've been waiting for a long time. Wu Yueling looked at her blankly. She didn't say anything but replied in her heart, I don't know when Dad will come. Dad said he would come soon. Little Man sighed and said in an old-fashioned tone, I wanted to find a random man for my mama, like the Uncle Yuan Tianqing outside. He's not bad, but you said you like my mama, so I have to give her to your father. But your father is so slow. Wu Yueling looked at her with confusion and asked, if your mama leaves with another uncle, does that mean she can't be my mama anymore? Little Man replied, of course, mama will have babies with other uncles. And then that will be me. Hee, don't tell your dad and my mom about this. This is our secret. We can't let them know. Wu Yueling looked at her with a confused expression. Huh? Why will you become a baby? Then if I let my father come in, will he have babies with your mama? Little Man blinked her eyes and smiled at her like two crescent moons. Naughtily, he said to her, that's right, if your father comes in, then I'll let him and my mama have a baby. Then I'll become that baby. I'll call you elder sister. From now on, I'll be the younger sister. Although she didn't understand other words, she heard Little Man said she would become her younger sister. Wu Yueling's eyes suddenly lit up. Then she looked at Little Man in surprise. Really? Really? Little Man walked in front of her and turned around, because her head and body were one. She shook her rattan-shaped hair at Wu Yueling and said to her, really, really. Hearing this, Wu Yueling immediately became happy. Then, He suddenly opened his short arms and hugged her. Fortunately, although little Man couldn't walk steadily, she was still able to run. Fortunately, although little Man couldn't walk steadily, she could still stand steadily. Otherwise, she would definitely be pushed to the ground by Wu Yueling. Little Man said to her, "Ah, you are so happy." Wu Yueling's cute little face was already smiling, and her two bright black eyes also became two small crescent moons. She nodded at her vigorously. Little Man suddenly thought, "Then if you didn't come today, I might let someone else be my father. Then I won't be your younger sister." But when she said this, Wu Yueling's expression froze for a moment. Then she looked at her blankly, as if thinking of what would happen if little Man became someone else's younger sister. Thinking of this, she couldn't do it anymore. Immediately, her little red mouth pouted, and her eyes that were smiling into crescent moons immediately became tearful, looking at little Man with red eyes. Seeing her expression, little Man knew something was wrong in her heart. Oh no! Seeing Wu Yueling suddenly about to cry, little Man's whole person, the whole vine felt bad. She hurriedly shook the vines on her head. Then her body swayed left and right like a roly-poly doll shaking its hair. She teased and coaxed her at the same time. All right, don't cry. When mommy comes in and sees you crying, she will definitely spank my butt. Although I don't know where my butt is." When little Man said the butt, she was also at a loss for a moment. But soon she didn't care about it because she still had to coax her. "Little Tot, look, aren't you here? Then I won't become someone else's little baby. Don't be scared." As a result, Wu Yueling's mouth pouted even more. She raised her little hand and began to wipe her tears that were falling down. But she looked like she was crying very sadly, but she didn't make a sound. She cried silently. Little Man felt bad all over. "Oh my God, don't cry. What should I do, mommy? Save me." After Lin Xiao went out, he had just talked with Yuan Qianxing and the others for a while. Then he heard little Man's call. Lin Xiao was a little confused and didn't know what was going on, so he could only flash back in. As a result, he saw Wu Yueling crying, and little Man rolling on the ground in front of her. "What are you guys doing? I've only been out for less than 3 minutes. Why is Tot crying?" Little Man immediately got up from the ground, then stretched out the vines on her head and hooked onto Lin Xiao's hand. Then she hung onto Lin Xiao's arm and dragged herself in front of Lin Xiao. Then she hung onto her body. Mommy, Tot suddenly cried. Little Man also didn't know why she was crying. Was it because she missed her daddy? As she spoke, she turned her head and blinked at Wu Yueling. Although Wu Yueling was crying, she still remembered what little Man said to her just now. She said that she couldn't let Big Sister Zombie know about that. She stopped crying slightly, then nodded at Lin Xiao with a pair of red-black eyes. She said that she missed her daddy. And she missed her daddy. No problem. Chapter 369. Lin Xiao smiled at her helplessly and said, "You've only been apart for a few hours and you already miss your father. No wonder he takes you with him every time he goes out to do a task. Not only do I have to be your nanny, but I also have to be your leader. How tiring." Wu Yueling didn't quite understand what she was saying, but she still managed to pick up on something else. That was, Lin Xiao was saying that her father was very tired. She knew what tiredness was. Tiredness was the feeling of doing a lot of things and then having no strength. That was what her father told her. If Big Sister Zombie helped her father work, wouldn't her father be too tired? She also liked Sister Zombie, and her father also said that he would find a mother for Lingling. Thinking about it, Wu Yueling suddenly rushed over and hugged Lin Xiao's thigh. Sister Zombie was her father's wife. She couldn't let others take her away. So Lin Xiao happened to sense Wu Yueling's thoughts from her touch, and her face darkened. What the hell? When did she become her father's wife? Children shouldn't talk nonsense. Lin Xiao quickly pulled Wu Yueling away and squatted down, then looked her in the eye and asked Lingling, "Who told you that I am your father's wife? If you dare to say that to your father, he will definitely spank you." Hearing Lin Xiao's words, little Man immediately froze. She thought to herself, oh no, Tiny Tot is still too young to keep a secret. But Wu Yueling just shook her head at Lin Xiao, then thought for a moment and nodded. Then he rushed over and hugged Lin Xiao's arm, sticking tightly to it. So now the two little ones were stuck on both sides of Lin Xiao's arm. Lin Xiao. It seemed that something terrible had happened. Seeing that Tiny Tot was about to reveal the secret, Little Man was anxious and suddenly said to Lin Xiao, Mama, Little Man can help you repair your body for the last time. Mama, go into the lake with Little Man. Lin Xiao didn't know that Little Man was trying to divert her attention. Hearing this, she immediately became interested. Is it okay? Didn't you say that you still need to find another person? Little Man said, Mommy, you can't find that person for the time being. So you can go down by yourself. Lin Xiao didn't know that he was being tricked by this cunning Little Man. He asked hesitantly, Really? Don't you need anyone else? In fact, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Now she could find a man she liked. Where was she going to find it? However, she felt that Little Man's words were somewhat contradictory to her previous words. So she still asked suspiciously, You won't lie to me, right? Little Man felt a little guilty, but she was very calm and didn't show it. Little Man won't lie to Mommy. Then he replied in his heart, Anyway, if you don't want to find her yourself, then Little Man will help you find her. At that time, Little Man would hide in Mommy's stomach. Mommy wouldn't be able to hit Little Man anyway. Lin Xiao didn't know what she was planning. If he knew, he would probably vomit blood. She nodded to young Man and said, All right then. Then she seemed to have thought of something. She turned her head and said to Wu Yueling, who was on her other arm, Tiny Tot, your father is coming soon. I'll send you out first in case he doesn't see you when he comes. Hearing that Lin Xiao was going to send her out, Wu Yueling immediately panicked. She quickly stretched out her head to look at Little Man. Little Man only narrowed her eyes at her. So Wu Yueling was relieved, and then obediently let Lin Xiao send her out. Yuan Tianxing and the others saw that Lin Xiao had only come out for a few minutes before she flashed back in. Then in less than 2 minutes, they saw her come out again with little Princess Wu Yueling. I'm going to go into seclusion to level up these 2 days. You guys be careful. Although the hidden danger, Yang Chao, has been eliminated, there may still be remnants of his gang or accomplices, as well as that robber. You guys have to be careful. Lin Xiao put Tiny Tot on the sofa and said to Yuan Tianxing and the others. Lin Wenwen looked at her, nodded and said, Then before you come out, I won't go out. She knew that the most dangerous person here was only herself, because she had no ability to protect herself now. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, It's good that you understand. She then looked at Wu Yueling and continued, I think Wu Changyue will come and take Tiny Tot away in a while. I don't know why he brought Tiny Tot here. Wu Yueling raised her head and looked at her, then suddenly pulled her hand. I asked my dad to send me here. I want to play with Little Man. Lin Xiao looked at her with some surprise. Huh? Is that you? Okay then. Be good, now wait here for your dad to pick you up. Okay. She then rubbed Wu Yueling's soft hair. Wu Yueling nodded at her, then raised her little hand to wipe away the tears on her eyes and face. Yuan Tianxing looked at Lin Xiao with some confusion and said, Are you going to level up again? It feels like for zombies the dangerous thing like leveling up is nothing to you. Lin Xiao turned her head and looked at him. Of course, do I still look like a zombie now? Yuan Tianxing nodded. Okay, you're special. But the group of zombies around you seem to be different from normal zombies. Is it because of you? Lin Xiao looked at him with a flash in her eyes, her pair of green eyes with a faint smile. Some things you only need to know in your heart. Don't say it out loud. Lin Wenwen looked at Lin Xiao's eyes, and her expression flashed with a hint of joy. Yes, this was the kind of expression with a smile, but the words were actually threatening people. She had seen it many times before, although the target of elder sister's threat was Lin Hao. Because elder sister doted on her, she never threatened her. Every time she saw Lin Hao's depressed expression after being scolded, she wanted to laugh. Just like Yuan Tianxing's depressed expression right now. Yuan Tianxing was also a bit depressed at this time. Okay. He blurted out her secret in a moment of carelessness. But she dared to threaten him in front of so many people, she really didn't give him face. Okay, I got it. While feeling depressed, Yuan Tianxing's heart also flashed a trace of strangeness. This familiar way of threatening. He thought he would never encounter it again. Lin Xiao nodded, and then flashed back into the space. After she entered the space, she found that Little Man was already swimming around happily in the lake. After seeing Lin Xiao come in, Little Man immediately swam towards her. Although Little Man didn't walk fast on land, She was like a fish in the water, and her appearance was extremely carefree, like a fish in water. Lin Xiao looked and then walked to the open space in front of the small space, and dragged a chair to the lake. Then she began to take off her clothes next to the chair, not caring if Shen Yuzhen in the small space would see. Shen Yuzhen really didn't know how to look, because when she saw Lin Xiao standing by the lake and starting to take off her clothes, she retreated with an awkward face. Although she was very curious about why Lin Xiao was taking off her clothes, it wasn't good to see someone naked. So she suppressed her curiosity. Chapter 370. Lin Xiao took off his clothes and hat. With a head full of green hair, he walked into the water naked. Little man, let's make a deal. Can you let my hair grow a little longer this time? Even if it grows slowly, it will still take 1 or 2 months before it can be seen. As she spoke, she walked into the lake. Little man stopped in front of her, then stretched out a vine to pull her and said, "NN. If there is a man with me, Mama's hair will grow out. But now there is no man, so Mama's hair can't grow out, Lin Xiao. Why must it be a man? You're just a kid. Don't keep asking me to find a man, okay? Aren't you ashamed?" Little man rolled her big eyes at her. Little man isn't shy, humph, Lin Xiao. She couldn't care less whose child this was. After Lin Xiao walked down, the water reached her chest. She raised her hand and dived into the water. Little man swam around her like a large jade white octopus. Its 6 little legs and the large bunch of vines on her hair were all moving in the water. At the same time, he extended a few more tendrils and wrapped them around Lin Xiao, pulling her down to the bottom of the lake. Lin Xiao had been to the bottom of the lake last time and knew that it was very, very deep. But this time, being pulled by Little Man, she found that she was sinking very fast. It should be said that Little Man was swimming very fast. It didn't take long for them to reach the bottom of the lake. Little Man stabbed one of her legs into the ground, and then her level 6 calf was stabbed into the ground. Then Lin Xiao watched as the vines on Little Man's body and head began to grow wildly. It grew bigger and bigger, taller and taller, longer and longer. When Lin Xiao stood at the bottom of the lake and saw that Little Man had turned into her true form, he was shocked. If this was placed outside, it would probably occupy an area of 300 to 400 square meters. Looking at the countless vines that were as thick as a calf dancing in the air, Lin Fan felt a chill run down his spine. Lin Xiao's scalp went numb. Little Man's 2 eyes were no longer the normal size. Lin Xiao raised his head and looked at the 2 incomparably huge green eyes. They were like 2 lamps, flashing in the countless vines. At this moment, Lin Xiao felt that his existence was very small. What a huge vine! The small vine stretched out a few smaller vines and wrapped around Lin Xiao, wrapping her tightly in layers. In any case, Lin Xiao had experienced it a few times before. Now, he was somewhat used to little vines wrapping around him. She couldn't see anything after the darkness in front of her. A large amount of green energy was seeping into her skin through her pores. That itchy feeling made Lin Xiao want to let out a long sigh. It was a very comfortable and refreshing feeling. As a zombie, she can still have this feeling. I don't know whether it is good or bad. Recalling the time when Wu Chengwe bit her thigh, she felt that her body was really sensitive now. It felt as if a layer of skin had just been peeled off, and then new skin and flesh had grown out. Even the slightest movement would stimulate the tactile nervous system. Very quickly, Lin Xiao felt a very hot feeling rotating in her stomach. And it started rotating from her abdomen, from her intestines to her lower abdomen, and then to her chest. Back and forth, up and down, very rhythmically rotating. Just as Little Man was helping Lin Xiao enter recovery mode, Wu Chengwe came from outside. Wei Jingchen saw him appear on the stairs from afar. He opened the door and informed everyone inside. Leader Wu is here. Yuan Tianxing and the others weren't surprised. Calculating the time, it was already past 2 in the afternoon. Even if things were busy, they should have finished a stage. Leader Wu is here to pick up little Lingling, right? Lin Wenwen said. Should be. Lingling, your dad is here. Yuan Tianxing looked at Wu Yueling from the side. After Lin Xiao entered the space, Wu Yueling sat on the sofa and played by herself, ignoring everyone else. Hearing Yuan Tianxing say that her dad was here, Wu Yueling immediately turned to look at the door. But she didn't get down from the sofa. Wu Chongyue was still wearing the same slender black military robe and long military boots. He strode in with his long legs. The hem of his military robe fluttered in the wind as he walked. Lingling, Dad is here to pick you up. Wu Chongyue smiled faintly and nodded at Yuan Tianqing after walking in. Then he said to Wu Yueling. However, his precious daughter didn't act as he had expected. She didn't rush towards him and jump on his lap as soon as she saw him. After all, if his precious daughter was in an unfamiliar environment, she would have this reaction every time she saw him. But this time she didn't. Behind Wu Chongyue were the two ladies, Meng Yu and Emoli. Because the information Emoli had was very important, after giving it to Wu Chongyue. Because she was also a researcher, Wu Chongyue was afraid that she would get into an accident like Liang Dashu. So he let her follow him. Congratulations, Leader Wu. You've successfully cleaned up the people who opposed you. In the future, there will only be 2 leaders in charge of this base. This base that was divided into 3 parts will be divided into 2 parts in the future. Yuan Tianqing smiled and congratulated him. After all, Wu Chongyue had planned for a long time and waited for this opportunity to counterattack and win. Although Miss Lu from their side was also stirring up trouble, for Wu Chongyue, this was his biggest gain. Wu Chongyue smiled and said, "This is nothing. In the future, when your base is built, it might be better than ours." Yuan Tianqing gestured to the sofa and invited him to sit down as he said, "That time is still too far away. The base can't be built without 2 or 3 years." Wu Chongyue sat next to Wu Yueling and said, "It's only 2 or 3 years. Time flies." Yuan Tianqing nodded in agreement. "That's true." Wu Chongyue turned his head and looked around. He asked, "Where's your Miss Lu? Why don't I see her? I also want to thank her for what happened in the morning. Maybe I wouldn't have found a reason to get rid of Yang Chao so quickly." He said it very nicely, but in the ears of Yuan Tianqing and the others it meant something else. Alright, that female zombie really wouldn't just quietly watch the show. She's a troublemaker. Lin Wenwen smiled and said, "Sister Lu is in her space. It might be a little inconvenient for her to come out." When she was about to say something, she suddenly looked up and saw something. Her expression froze. Then she stared blankly at the top of Wu Chongyue's head. The others noticed her expression and looked up. They saw a few white vines as thick as a woman's calves suddenly hanging down from the ceiling. They quickly rolled towards Xiao Budian. Wu Chongyue saw this and couldn't react in time. In the end, he just pressed Wu Yueling into his arms without thinking. Chapter 371. So in the blink of an eye, they saw a level 7 paranormal with a child being swept away by a few strange vines and disappeared. "Brother Yu." Meng Yu's expression changed greatly as she looked up at the place where the vines disappeared. In the end, he didn't see anything. That's right, these vines wrapped Wu Chongyue and Wu Yueling and disappeared into thin air. At this time, a finger-thin vine suddenly stretched out from the corner, quietly wrapped around Meng Yu's hand, and then quickly disappeared. Meng Yu was stunned for a moment, and then her expression was a little strange. "Miss Meng, how are you?" Seeing her expression, the others also felt very strange. But they were not worried because Wu Chongyue was also a level 7 lightning expert. How could he be afraid of a vine of unknown origin? Moreover, they did not feel the vine's intention to attack, let alone kill. Because of this, Wu Chongyue's reaction was a beat slower. If it was a vine with malicious intent, it would probably be struck into pieces by Wu Chongyue's lightning as soon as it appeared. Meng Yu looked at the others with a blank and strange expression and said, "That strange vine sent a message to me saying, 'Borrow a man.' What does that mean? Borrow a man for a while?" Everyone was confused, and then felt that the other party was too good at borrowing people. Who wouldn't just pick the most powerful one here. What did the leader get borrowed for? The others shook their heads. Both of them were dumbfounded, and their eyes were filled with question marks. At this time, Wu Chongyue, who was suddenly pulled into the space, also had a blank expression. He held Wu Yueling, and as soon as he arrived at this place, those white vines disappeared. Wu Chongyue looked around vigilantly and found that he was standing by a strange lake. He subconsciously took a few steps back, away from the direction of the lake. Then he turned his head to look around. There was grass, a few sets of furniture on the flat ground, and a strange forest. Apart from here at a glance there was a few kilometers of fog. The sky above his head was the same, as if there was a thick layer of fog covering it. He moved his hand and his expression changed slightly. With one hand holding Wu Yueling, he stretched out the other hand in front of his eyes. The lightning in his hand crackled, but the size was much smaller. Thin electric snakes danced in his hands. Wu Chengyue looked up at the sky. He could not feel a trace of lightning power in the sky. It was as if they had completely lost contact. It wasn't that he couldn't contact it, but he couldn't condense the power of thunder and lightning. To put it simply, his power was suppressed here. He could not even use 1/10 of the power of his superpower. No, not even 5%. Just as he was trying to figure out what was going on, Wu Yueling, who was in his arms, suddenly twisted her body. She slid down from his arms. Lingling, don't run around. It's dangerous here. Wu Chengyue was shocked and quickly pulled her back. However, Wu Yueling shook her head at him and suddenly pointed in the direction of the small space. Wu Chengyue looked over and saw a figure flash by. Who's there? Come out, he shouted. Shen Yuzhen carefully walked out of the small space, and then looked at him with a puzzled expression. Because it was a little far away, Wu Chengyue had to look carefully before he recognized Shen Yuzhen. You are Xiao Zhen? Wu Chengyue recognized Chen Yuding's wife, so he was slightly surprised when he saw Shen Yuzhen. Shen Yuzhen slowly walked over, stood 3 meters away from him, and nodded to him. Wu Chengyue hesitantly looked at her, and then asked, It's really you. You are now a zombie, right? Did you really bite Puru Kang? Shen Yuzhen timidly looked at him and nodded. Wu Chengyue's eyes calmed down and then he looked around and asked, Then this is her space, right? Where is she? Why did she suddenly bring us here? Shen Yuzhen pointed to the direction of the lake, and then shook her head. She didn't know why Wu Chengyue suddenly appeared in Lin Qiao's space. She saw that Lin Qiao had gone into the lake not long ago, and he hadn't come up yet. Wu Chengyue turned his head to look at the lake, and then asked her in confusion, What do you mean? You can't talk? Shen Yuzhen shook her head, and then nodded. Wu Chengyue suddenly rummaged in his pocket, and then found a pen and a small notebook. Come here, write on it. Shen Yuzhen didn't disobey and walked over. She took the pen and paper and wrote a few words. She went into the lake and hasn't come up yet. Wu Chengyue strangely looked at her, and then looked at the words on the paper. Then he turned to look at the lake, puzzled. In the lake? What is she doing in the lake? Wu Yueling, who was beside his leg, poked her head out from time to time, and looked in the direction of the lake. Wu Chengyue looked at Shen Yuzhen and asked, You have woken up, why aren't you with Chen Yuding? Does he know you are awake? Shen Yuzhen's expression was a little sad, and then she looked at the stones on the ground and shook her head at him. Wu Chengyue looked at her a few times, and seemed to understand her meaning. You don't want to see him like this? You should know that he won't dislike your current appearance, and he doesn't even care that you are a zombie. Why do you still care about this? Shen Yuzhen looked up at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Wu Chengyue faintly said, Feelings are between the two of you. You are suffering here and he is suffering more than you out there. You can't only think about yourself. If you love him, I don't think you should hide from him. The emotion in Shen Yuzhen's eyes became more intense. If she was still alive, at this time there would probably be tears overflowing. Wu Chengyue wasn't wrong. Feelings were a matter between two people. It was unfair to Chen Yuding if she was the only one hiding. But she was not ready to see him yet. Anyway, you have taken revenge, and your wish has been fulfilled. Go back and live well with him. Wu Chengyue said, and suddenly his nose moved, as if he smelled something. He looked at Shen Yuzhen strangely and asked, Did you ask what the smell was? It's a bit weird. Shen Yuzhen sniffed and looked at Wu Chengyue blankly and shook her head. She didn't smell anything? Wu Chengyue looked down at Wu Yueling, and asked Lingling, Do you smell anything? Wu Yueling popped her head out from his leg, and looked up at him, and then sniffed left and right with her small nose. Then she nodded to him, indicating that she also smelled something strange. The smell was not unpleasant, not fragrant, not sweet. It was just a bit weird and a bit pungent. Shen Yuzhen looked at the two of them with surprise. Is there a smell? But she didn't smell anything. Was it because she was a zombie that she couldn't smell it? Chapter 372. Wu Yueling also smelled it curiously, feeling that the smell was very strange. But for some reason the more she smelled it, the more she wanted to smell it. In the end, as she smelled it, she began to feel drowsy. Fortunately, she was no stranger to this place. When she felt a little sleepy, she consciously walked to the bed and climbed up. When Wu Chongyue smelled the odor, he suddenly froze. Shen Yuzhen looked at Wu Yueling and knew that she would not be in danger here. Then she looked up at Wu Chongyue and found that his expression seemed to be a little strange. She raised her hand and waved it twice in front of Wu Chongyue. Then she patted his arm with her hand. Wu Chongyue did not respond. His handsome face was dull and his eyes were unfocused. The lightning in his hand had long disappeared. What was going on? Shen Yuzhen looked at Wu Chongyue in surprise and patted him a little harder. However, Wu Chongyue still stood there in a daze with a blank expression. She turned to look at Wu Yueling on the other side of the bed, and saw that she had already laid down on the bed and hugged the quilt to sleep. Just when Shen Yuzhen did not know what to do next, she suddenly felt a fluctuation of breath in the lake. She quickly turned her head and saw several long vines coming out of the water. Then it stretched out in their direction. Shen Yuzhen was still very afraid of little man's breath. Seeing little man appear, and it was coming here, she immediately turned around and ran away in fear. Regardless of Wu Chongyue's situation, on second thought, this was Miss Lu's space anyway. She should not hurt Wu Chongyue. 3 or 4 vines stretched out more than 20 meters long and came to Wu Chongyue's side, circling around him for a while. The sharp tips of the vines poked his face for a while, then poked his chest for a while, and then poked Wu Chongyue's smooth waist left and right, not even letting go of his arms. Shen Yuzhen hid in the small space and looked at Wu Chongyue being molested by a few vines with a subtle expression. Well, she should not be wrong, right? It was indeed molesting. In the end, her thoughts were soon confirmed, because little man began to pull at Wu Chongyue's clothes. After pulling off his belt, she did not even know how to unbutton it. Anyway, her vines were so thick that she couldn't do the delicate work of unbuttoning. 2 of the little vines drilled into his collar, while the other 2 curled around his hem. Then he pulled hard on both sides. With a few soft sounds, Wu Chongyue's military robe was torn apart. The buttons bounced around and fell to the ground. Then it was the inner shirt and the long military pants inside, which were inevitably ravaged by little man. Shen Yuzhen covered her eyes as she watched their leader being stripped naked by a plant with a dazed expression on his face. Soon she saw Wu Chongyue's firm but not exaggerated muscles, and the lines were mesmerizing. Watching little man take off the last piece of Wu Chongyue's underwear, Shen Yuzhen quickly closed her eyes and turned her head. Would she be silenced by the leader in the future? But the leader's body is really good. Shen Yuzhen silently swallowed a mouthful of saliva. With her back facing Wu Chongyue, her mind was filled with Wu Chongyue's slender and muscular body and his long straight legs. I have my A-ting. No matter how beautiful the leader is, she's not my type. Although Wu Chongyue's expression was sluggish, his consciousness was still clear. At this moment he was about to collapse. What the hell? What the hell is this situation? Why can't he move now? Although he could still see, it was all blurry. However, he could still sense the feeling in his body clearly. He was stripped by someone. No, it seemed like it wasn't a human. It was a few white vines. What the hell did that female zombie keep in her space? And why was it so perverted? When he felt his whole body was cold, Wu Chongyue found that his body was being pulled towards the lake. He was very panicked, confused, at a loss, and so on. He didn't know what was going to happen next. It felt like his clothes were being stripped off, so he shouldn't be doing anything bad next. Or would it be someone else doing it again? Thinking of this, Wu Chongyue was speechless. He felt that his naked body began to walk towards the lake uncontrollably. When he got closer, he suddenly saw that there was a chair by the lake, and there was a pile of neatly folded clothes on the chair. Whose clothes? Was there someone else in this lake? Could it be a female zombie? And his ability was now completely ineffective because he was now in someone else's space. There was something here that limited the energy of his ability. Looking at his feet step by step into the lake, a cool feeling came from his skin. Soon Wu Chongyue's expression became sober, but he still kept walking down. There was no way. His arms and waist were wrapped by a few vines, and they were using a force that he couldn't react to drag him down. Wu Chongyue thought. Did these vines want to drown him here? Otherwise, why would they keep dragging him into the lake? But when he went down into the lake, the water was over his head. He found that he was wrong, because the lake didn't give him a feeling of suffocation. It was as if he could breathe in the water. The water was very clear, but the bottom was very dark, and he couldn't see what was below. And it seemed that there were no underwater creatures living in this lake, because he didn't even see a fish or a shrimp. The vines kept pulling him down, and then suddenly a lot of vines stretched out from below. Then his whole body was wrapped up in circles. He wanted to struggle, but he even lost the ability to control his body. He couldn't struggle at all, and in the end, he could only watch these strange vines wrap him like a dumpling. Not knowing how deep he went, Wu Chongyue suddenly saw a cocoon wrapped by vines at the bottom. It was about 1.8 meters tall as a person. The more he looked, the more he felt that there was a person wrapped in it. Wu Chongyue couldn't help but think of his previous situation. Would he look like this now? His skin was tightly wrapped by a layer of cold vines, and the strength of the constriction wasn't strong. It didn't make him feel uncomfortable, and it didn't look like it was loosened. Wu Chongyue suddenly felt that his body control came back, and he could control his own body. But after he moved a few times, he found that even if he could control his body now, he couldn't break away from these vines wrapped around his body. Right here, he suddenly felt a wave of fresh energy from the vines passing through his pores and into his body. Finally, it gathered towards his small stomach. The energy was originally fresh with a chill, but soon it began to slowly heat up in his body. Especially when it reached his lower abdomen, it became boiling hot. Chapter 373. The heat in his abdomen began to spread throughout Wu Chongyue's body. This kind of heat didn't make Wu Chongyue uncomfortable. On the contrary, it made him feel very comfortable. It was like he was soaking in hot water. After the initial unbearable heat passed, there was a feeling of numbness. Wu Chongyue only felt that all the pores in his body had opened up. He let out a long sigh of relief. The heat in his body made him feel very comfortable and refreshed. After this state lasted for dozens of seconds, Wu Chongyue felt that his whole body was floating. His mind also stopped working and he floated in enjoyment. But not long after, he couldn't calm down, because the burning feeling in his abdomen was getting stronger and stronger. Slowly it had nowhere to go. It accumulated in his abdomen. Wu Chongyue only felt dizzy. His throat was dry. The fire in his abdomen made him want to vent. But he couldn't find a way. This suffocating feeling immediately cleared Wu Chongyue's mind a little. Why did he feel like he had been drugged with some kind of bad medicine? Wu Chongyue was not in the mood to care why he became like this. He also didn't want to know why he was suddenly pulled into that female zombie's space. That's right, he just wanted to vent. Even if he didn't want other people's hands, he could use his own. But he couldn't move now. The burning in his lower abdomen made Wu Chongyue feel like his whole body was on fire. Something was trapped in his heart. It made his heart feel like it was being scratched by something. The itchy feeling couldn't be relieved. At this time, he suddenly felt that he was being moved by something. Then the vines that tightly wrapped around his body suddenly moved. She didn't release him but slowly moved him around. He didn't know what they were doing. In the end, before he could react, a naked body was suddenly shoved into his arms. A slippery and hot back was pressed against his chest. This push, Wu Chongyue's whole heart was shaken. Suddenly, Wu Chongyue felt his whole body relax. Then he quickly subconsciously hugged the body in his arms. He turned his head and saw that it was still dark. He reached out a hand and touched. He found that the vines didn't want to let go of him. They just loosened a little so that he could move freely. And who was this woman who suddenly appeared? Wu Chongyue wrapped his arms around her waist. Above her slender and firm waist should be her soft breasts. However, Wu Chongyue still resisted the urge to touch it with his hand. At that moment, Lin Xiao had the urge to die. Originally, she was absorbing the energy from little man and was so comfortable that she forgot about the time. Suddenly, he felt someone sticking to his back. By the time she reacted, she felt a strong arm tightly wrapped around her waist, and there was something poking her from behind. Lin Xiao was shocked and his heart was in a mess. Who is it? How could there be another person here? Where did this man come from? What the hell was little man doing? Then Lin Xiao felt little man's restraint on her slightly loosen, and then she was tightly hugged by the man behind her weakly. She wanted to struggle, but because she was absorbing little man's power just now, she couldn't do anything. This caused her entire body to enter a state of powerlessness. Her hands and feet were weak, and she couldn't struggle at all. Then she felt another hand start to move around her body, from her neck to her shoulder, and then down from her shoulder. This man's hand brought a burst of numb feeling, which made Lin Xiao feel uncomfortable. Damn it! She felt like she was sold by little man. This guy actually lied to her and told her to come down alone. In the end, he had already found another man for her, and she still didn't know who the man behind her was. Lin Xiao gritted her teeth at little man and the man behind her, but at the same time, she was confused by the man's restless hand. Suddenly that hand touched her head. Lin Xiao sensed that the man's body seemed to stiffen for a moment. At that moment, Wu Chengyue touched Lin Xiao's head and felt a tingling sensation on his hand. He didn't feel good. Who was this woman who looked like a baldy? Wasn't this woman that female zombie? Wu Chengyue wanted to push her away, but the woman's soft body and smooth touch made him reluctant to let go. But thinking about the identity of the other person, she was a zombie. A zombie? Could it be that he was going to that with a zombie? That feeling, just thinking about it, made him feel so good. But why didn't this female zombie have any reaction at all? Her whole body was limp, as if she was at his mercy. Let go me. Who are you? Suddenly, a voice sounded in Wu Chengyue's mind. He was shocked. Who was it? Let go. That voice told him to let go. Could it be? Wu Chengyue's two hands tightly hugged Lin Xiao's waist, and then leaned his head on the back of her head. He asked that voice in his heart, "Are you Miss Liu? Did you pull me in? What do you want to do?" Lin Xiao's voice came over weakly. "It's not me. You can control yourself. Please let go." What she meant was that she couldn't control herself now. Wu Chengyue thought with some surprise. What was the other person's situation now? But he didn't follow Lin Xiao's request to let go, and was still tightly stuck behind her. He even rubbed against her buttocks intentionally or unintentionally. "It's too late, you pulled me in to light the fire. Come and extinguish it yourself." Lin Xiao's body went limp from his rubbing, and she almost vomited blood in her heart. "Get lost. It's not me. It's little man's doing. Let go." Wu Chengyue tried hard to endure his lower body that was about to explode, and then he laughed lightly in his heart. "I don't know who the little man you're talking about is, but it's impossible for me to move away now." Lin Xiao panicked and said, "You know I am. You actually want to do with a zombie?" Wu Chengyue smiled and said, "It doesn't matter. I'll do it even if you give me a sow." Lin Xiao. Was he calling her a sow? Wasn't he? She said angrily. "If you dare to touch me, I'll castrate you when we get out." Wu Chengyue said, "That depends on whether you have the ability or not. Come, let's get down to business now." As he spoke, he suddenly turned Lin Xiao's body over, and they were face to face. Chapter 374. When Lin Xiao heard his words, she knew something was wrong. But her limbs were weak and she couldn't break free even if she wanted to. Then she felt her body being turned around by the other party, and they were now face to face. The thing that was poking at her back was now poking at a certain part of her body. Then her lips were sealed and a slippery warm tongue licked her lips. Then it pried open her mouth and came in. Lin Xiao wasn't breathing, so she didn't feel suffocated. But the other's tongue was agilely stirring in her mouth. It scraped the roof of her mouth and curled up to entangle with her tongue. "Who are you?" Until now, Lin Xiao still didn't know the other's identity, and the other already knew who she was. Wu Chengyue's movements paused. He was a bit surprised. She actually asked who he was? Didn't she get him in here? But the sweet taste in the other's mouth made Wu Chengyue quickly throw this question to the back of his mind. He sucked on Lin Xiao's lips and replied with two words in his heart. "You guess." Lin Xiao wanted to bite him. It would be best if he could bite off the tongue that entered her mouth. But she didn't even have the strength to bite him. Actually, Wu Chengyue was also very curious. He didn't expect this female zombie to taste so good. Although he couldn't smell anything, The taste in his mouth was sweet, and the other's skin was very smooth, and the muscles were very firm and elastic. Lin Xiao gritted her teeth at little man. If she still didn't know who was behind this, then she wouldn't be called Lin Xiao anymore. Little man, if you don't let him stop, I'll deal with you when we get out. The surrounding vines slightly shrunk, and then a voice was transmitted to the two people's minds. Little man is also helping you guys. Don't stop, Lingling's dad. Take care when you get out. Kakaka. Little man's last laugh made the two people's hearts go cold. It was a strange feeling. But Wu Chongyue quickly forgot about it because his body was swollen to the point where he couldn't take it anymore. Lin Xiao felt that the other's movements were a bit urgent. One of her legs was picked up and hung on the other's strong waist. She was shocked and her whole body tensed up. Stop. In the end, what followed was the feeling of being pierced through. She didn't feel any pain, but the feeling of having a foreign object stuffed into her body was very uncomfortable and strange. Fuck. This is too much of a rush. It was as if her brain had exploded, and she suddenly lost all sense of her body. Messy images flashed through her mind. From time to time, Lin Xiao would see himself sitting on top of a naked man, looking down at the man's face, which was filled with suppressed hatred. She recognized this face. It was Wu Chongyue. Then the scene changed again. She saw that she seemed to be walking in the base. Then when she looked down, she could see a pair of white long legs wearing exquisite high-heel shoes. Also, she was lying under Yang Chao's body, moaning seductively. Looking at Yang Chao's mature face, the other party's expression was calm. It was just that his lower body was constantly shaking with force. Lin Xiao knew that these were not her own memories but Lu Tianyu's. At this time the scene in her mind changed again, and suddenly it turned to another scene. She was also lying on the bed, but the man on top of her had changed from Yang Chao to another man. Yang Jianhua. Lin Xiao was stunned. Why did this man appear? Moreover, Yang Jianhua's expression was very comfortable as he moved on top of her. Drops of sweat fell from his handsome face. Don't worry, I won't leave you. I will always stay by your side. Yang Jianhua's mouth was moving, and he said something that couldn't be heard clearly. Lin Xiao instantly woke up, and all the scenes in her mind disappeared. Before she could carefully search for the memories just now, the violent impact made her whole body tremble. The hard thing in her body hit her heart deeply, and the feeling of being at a loss just now suddenly disappeared. Wu Chongyue had just started to straighten up and enter her body when he suddenly stopped. He froze in surprise, and his arms were still tightly wrapped around the soft body in his arms. However, the feeling that his dick seemed to have pierced through a layer of something made him unable to calm down. No way. This female zombie's body was still intact? Hadn't she had a relationship with a man before? This conjecture shocked Wu Chongyue. At this time a voice quietly came into his mind. That's because I helped Mama refurbish her body and restore it to its original form. You're really lucky, Lingling's father. Wu Chongyue was hit by the words of this voice, and he was stunned. He said in his heart with some disbelief, Is what you said true? Who are you? The voice replied, Didn't Mama tell you just now, I'm little man, Wu Chongyue. He thought that this female zombie was fooling him. Little man continued, This is Mama's new body, so I used my power to refurbish Mama's body, so Mama's first intercourse is given to you. You have to be responsible, Wu Chongyue suddenly asked. Then does your mama? She knows about this? Little man said, Mama's consciousness has entered the whirlpool of memories. She doesn't feel what you're doing now. She can only feel it when her consciousness returns. So she's still unclear about her own body for the first time. Wu Chongyue silently thought, did I earn a lot? Or did I get into trouble? But Wu Chongyue's mind was quickly attracted by the feeling of his little brother, being wrapped up by a layer of softness. He originally rushed in when he was feeling uncomfortable from the swelling, but the tightly wrapped soft and warm feeling made him heave a sigh of relief. Moreover, after breaking through that layer and listening to little man's few words, Xiao Manman's expression changed. Something in his heart was already different. Wu Chongyue, who quickly made a decision, began to move his waist rhythmically. He slowly and forcefully hit the other's soft and bouncy body. Whether it was a new body or refurbishment, he didn't care about these things now. Right now, he just wanted to release his brother who was in so much pain. So when Lin Xiao woke up, She felt a fierce hit on her lower body. Although she didn't feel any pain, the frequent hits gave her a strange feeling in her chest. This feeling made her chest tighten and tighten. Every time he came in, the left side of her chest would tighten a bit. Then it would be accompanied by a kind of dull pain. What the hell, how can there be a person who doesn't feel pain down there but instead feels pain in the chest? Is she a heart patient? Chapter 375. Not knowing how long had passed, Lin Xiao only knew that she was floating up and down. Under the surging tide of emotions, she had been enduring the throbbing pain in her heart and the numbness in her body. Just as her consciousness floated for a long time, she suddenly felt that the other's movements suddenly accelerated. Oh, bastard. Lin Xiao was hit by his hot energy and her whole body stiffened, then slightly trembled. Her consciousness was dizzy, her whole body floated, as if she was about to be washed away by a flood, fierce and turbulent. Wu Chungyue was nailed to her body, spraying for a full 10 seconds. Then he finally stopped. At this time the surrounding light suddenly brightened. Wu Chungyue looked at the woman in his arms. He couldn't help but be surprised and reached out to touch her long hair that was so long that it could float down. It was soft and smooth. The length should be just enough to hang down to her chest. But because they were in the water now, it floated back along with the water floating. The female zombie closed her eyes tightly. The pair of dark eyes on her delicate face could not be seen, but it became very quiet and beautiful. Slender and beautiful eyebrows, thick and curly eyelashes, straight and exquisite nose, delicate light pink cherry lips. Wu Chungyue stared at her facial features, then began to use his hand to gently trace the lines of her facial features. He felt that her whole body was like a boneless mermaid, being held in his arms. There was suddenly a place in his heart that was slowly collapsing, then being filled up again by something. Wu Chungyue looked around and found that they were still in the water. It was still clear to his eyes. There were no vines nor any other strange things. He hung the female zombie's slender arm around his neck and then swam up with her. He clearly looked up and didn't seem to be far from the water surface, but he swam for a long time before breaking out of the water. Wu Chungyue, who was out of the water, turned his head and looked around. He saw his baby daughter squatting next to the chair by the lake. At this time Wu Yueling also saw Wu Chungyue coming out of the water. Her eyes immediately lit up. She looked at Wu Chungyue's side with sparkling eyes. Wu Chungyue dragged Lin Xiao over there, then carried her up from the lake. Wu Yueling was very sensible. She held Wu Chungyue's clothes that were destroyed by little man and stood there waiting. Lingling, don't look at Daddy. Turn around and close your eyes. Dad isn't wearing any clothes right now. Wu Chungyue stood in the water until the water reached his waist. He told Wu Yueling. Wu Yueling obediently held his clothes and turned around with her back facing Wu Chungyue. Wu Chungyue carried Lin Xiao out of the water. Then he walked towards the direction of the bed. He put Lin Xiaoping on the bed and covered her with a blanket. Then he turned around and walked over to Wu Yueling. He bent down to take his clothes from her back. Lingling, Daddy has to put on some clothes now. Daddy said that you can only open your eyes when I open them, okay? Wu Yueling nodded. After Wu Chungyue took the clothes from her hands, she raised her hands to cover her eyes. Wu Chungyue searched through the pile of clothes Wu Yueling had given him and found his underwear that had been torn into strips. What kind of expression should he use to pay homage to his torn underwear? No, it shouldn't be mourning his underwear now. It should be, what should he wear now? Shouldn't he wear it? It didn't feel good to have his dick swinging around in his pants. After thinking about it, he looked towards the direction of the furniture. There were a few wardrobes over there. Was there any male underwear? Thinking that this was a female zombie's space, she would probably only collect female clothes. However, Wu Chungyue still had the attitude of trying to find it. He walked over and opened the clothes to take a look. The first one was all female. None. The second one was all children's. None. The third one. Found it. And they were all male clothes. Wu Chungyue delightedly found a brand new pair of men's underwear at the bottom of the wardrobe that was filled with men's clothes. After putting on his underwear, he casually found a suitable set of plain clothes in the wardrobe and put it on. This was because his uniform had been destroyed by the vines. After Wu Chonghua put on the clothes, he turned around and called Wu Yueling. Okay, Lingling, come here. When Wu Yueling heard his call, she immediately turned her head around. Then she happily ran towards him. Wu Chonghua sat on the sofa with her in his arms, then looked around. Suddenly he said to the air, You said your name is Little Man, right? Can you send us out now? This female zombie, she can't wake up in this state right now. Sitting on his lap, Wu Yueling also raised her head to look around. But she was looking in the direction of the lake. At this time she saw a few thick vines falling from the sky. They were still jade white. However, it looked a little different. It looked a little illusory. And they were all directly falling from the white misty sky. Like 10,000 feet long vines, they hung down high. Wu Yueling and Wu Chonghua looked up curiously at the sky vines falling from the sky. Their eyes were full of surprise. The vines gently wrapped around their hands. A voice rang out, Little Man can send you out. Wu Yueling looked up at the sky vines above her head with her mouth slightly open. She asked, Why did you go to the sky? Are you not in the lake? Why don't you come out? Little Man replied, I'm about to become a baby, so I can't come out now. I have to wait for Mama to give birth to me. Hearing this, Wu Yueling nodded excitedly. So you will become a baby when you come out? Little Man replied, Yes, but it will take a long time, you have to wait. Wu Yueling nodded. Wu Chonghua asked, What are you? What's the relationship between you and her? Little Man replied to him, She is my mama. I am Little Man. Wu Chonghua felt that he didn't quite understand her answer, so he changed the topic. When will she wake up like this? Little Man replied, Mama is now in the whirlpool of memories. It's up to her to come out. Little Man doesn't know either. Wu Chonghua silently looked in the direction of Lin Xiao, and suddenly asked, Her body can be restored to a normal person. Did you help her restore it? Little Man replied proudly, That's right. Little Man's energy is used to repair zombies and humans. It's just that Little Man's energy isn't very effective on living humans. At most, it can only heal them a little. Chapter 376. Wu Chonghua was silent for a while, then sighed and said, You're already very good. Don't tell anyone else about this in the future, okay? Little Man said happily, Got it, Papa. Wu Chonghua's expression suddenly froze. He raised his head and asked with a confused face, Wait, what did you call me? Little Man replied blankly, Papa? In the future, when I go out, I will become your and Mama's baby. Wu Yueling also heard Little Man's reply to Wu Chonghua. She immediately patted Wu Chonghua's hand and nodded to him. Wu Chonghua looked down at her and saw that her eyes were full of rare happiness and expectation. He couldn't help but ask with a headache, Lingling, do you know what we are talking about? Why are you so happy? Do you really want a younger sister or brother? Or... Suddenly he stopped, then turned his head to look at Lin Xiao, pointing at Lin Xiao and asked Wu Yueling, Do you want to call her mother? He thought Wu Yueling would shake her head, but Wu Yueling nodded to him. Wu Chonghua looked at her with some hesitation, and asked with a strange expression, You mean, you want her to be your stepmother? Wu Yueling nodded like a chick pecking rice. Wu Chonghua looked at her, and suddenly a thought flashed in his mind. Why do I feel that you and Little Man are hiding something from us? Are you very familiar with her? Wu Yueling first looked at Wu Chonghua blankly, then heard him ask if she was familiar with Little Man. She nodded, indicating that although they were not very familiar, they were very familiar. But they were good friends. Wu Chonghua thought of the female zombie's reaction just now, then suddenly raised his head and asked, Are you still hiding something from her? She doesn't even know who I am, right? Little Man was silent for a while, then said, Because Mommy's last body repair is also a very important change for Little Man. So it needs a man's sperm and male energy to complete. But Little Ling said she likes my mommy, so I asked her if she wants to call me mommy like me. Little Ling said yes. Wu Chonghua raised his head and stared at her with a subtle expression and said, So you kidnapped me here, right? You really have guts to not let your mother know about it. Let's see how she'll deal with you when she wakes up. He didn't know if it was a man's psychological effect, but after tasting the wonderful taste of this female zombie, he now thought that if Little Man brought another man in, and then took the female zombie's body and delicious taste for himself, there would be a fire burning in his heart. A corner of his heart suddenly rejoiced that he was the one who came in. Wu Chongyue looked back at the female zombie lying quietly on the bed. That peaceful sleeping face was very beautiful. Her originally bald head now had a head of beautiful hair, which was scattered messily on the pillow. He stood up and carried Wu Yueling to the bedside. Then he sat on the bed and looked at the female zombie's face closer. Good job, Lingling. He suddenly turned his head and praised Wu Yueling, then said, You can call her mom from now on. Do you understand? Hearing this, Wu Yueling smiled happily. Seeing Wu Yueling's smile, Wu Chengyue's heart melted. He suddenly found that ever since Lingling met this female zombie, there were more smiles on her face, and she became more cheerful. Although she still didn't speak, this change already made Wu Chengyue very happy. And he was also a little curious about this female zombie, seeing that she had always taken care of his Lingling, and even saved Lingling a few times. Now this situation, it really was as Mengyu said. He could marry her. Last time he bit her thigh, and this time he directly ate her whole body. Well, he still didn't know how this female zombie would react when she wakes up. Wu Chengyue reached out to lift Lin Xiao's chin, and carefully looked at her facial features. The more he looked, the more familiar he felt, as if he had seen her somewhere before. The first time he saw her wearing the contact lenses he gave her, she didn't have those familiar zombie eyes. He felt that she gave him another familiar feeling, but he couldn't tell what was familiar. After looking at her delicate facial features, Wu Chengyue let go of his hand and said to Wu Yueling, Since you like her so much, then Dad will help you marry her. Okay. Dad already ate her, you have to be responsible for her in the future. Wu Yueling didn't really understand what Wu Chengyue meant by eating her. But when she heard that he wanted to marry Lin Xiao, although she didn't quite understand what he meant, she vaguely knew that this was a good thing. She immediately nodded to Wu Chengyue. At this time, Little Man in the Sky also shook her heavenly vine, saying, and me, you also have to be responsible for me. From now on, you are my dad. I want to be little Lingling's little sister. Wu Chengyue looked at her with a subtle expression and asked, Then you have to let me see your real body, right? I don't even know what you are. How can I be responsible for you? Besides, you are the one who pulled me in, shouldn't you be responsible for me? Little Man was stunned by his question. Huh, that seems to be right, then I will become your baby after a while. At that time, you will still have to be responsible, humph. Wu Chengyue listened to her coquettish and shameless tone, and was a bit speechless. But he still caught a key point. He asked, You said, you are going to become a baby? You can't be in her stomach right now, right? While speaking, Wu Chengyue suddenly stared at Lin Xiao's lower abdomen. Little Man excitedly replied, Soon, Little Man is only half in now. There is still half. Wu Chengyue. After the end of the world, there were strange things every year, but today there were especially many. Zombies don't eat people, zombies can save people, zombies become beautiful, zombies can talk, zombies can build a base, zombies can give birth to babies. The last point still needed to be verified. In any case, Wu Chengyue felt that, ever since he met this female zombie, the zombies around her were all changing, becoming different. They became different from ordinary zombies, becoming human with memories. And they weren't like Yang Chao, who became monsters. They all changed back to human beings. At this time, Little Man said, Little Man is going to send you out. Little Man still needs to continue to help Mama upgrade her energy so that Mama can give birth to babies. While speaking, she pulled Wu Chengyue and Wu Yueling, and the two of them flashed, bringing them out of the space. The people who had been waiting in the living room for the whole night suddenly saw Wu Chengyue change his clothes and appear with Wu Yueling in his arms. They didn't react for a while. Chapter 377. Leader Wu, you're out. Do you have any changes? Lin Wenwen was the first to react. He looked at him with slight delight and asked. But looking at his clothes, it seemed like something really happened. Brother Yu. Meng Yu also came over happily. Yuan Tianqing smiled calmly and asked him, Did you go into Miss Lu's space? If you don't come out, these two ladies are going to tear this place apart. He then looked at Meng Yu and Emoli meaningfully. We're just worried about leader, Emoli said expressionlessly. Yuan Tianqing nodded. I know. Wu Chengyue hugged Wu Yueling and put on his usual smile to the crowd. I'm fine, Miss Lu is probably the one who's in trouble. He ate them all, so she was the one who was in trouble. Although Wu Changyue felt that little Man's words were a little unbelievable, if the heavenly vine really turned into a baby through his and Miss Lu's intercourse, then it was serious. Meng Yu looked at his clothes. Brother Yu, your clothes. Wu Changyue smiled faintly. Oh, they fell into the lake and got wet, so I changed them with the set in her space. Meng Yu didn't hear the hidden meaning in his words and nodded. Yuan Tianqing, on the other hand, glanced at Wu Changyue subtly. From a man's point of view, he could tell that Wu Changyue was lying. All right, we won't disturb you anymore. We came to pick up Lingling and didn't expect to be delayed until now. No need to send us off. Wu Changyue smiled as if he didn't notice Yuan Tianqing's strangeness. After saying that, he carried Wu Yueling and walked out the door. Take care. Yuan Tianqing and the others smiled at him and walked them to the door. Seeing Wei Jingchen close the door, Yuan Tianqing smiled meaningfully. Do you think Leader Wu and Miss Lu are fine? Du Yuanxing and Long Qingying looked at him blankly. What could happen to them? But why did he go in for so long? Why didn't I see Miss Lu come out? Only Lin Wenwen seemed to have guessed something and said hesitantly, why did Leader Wu change his clothes? Yuan Tianqing glanced at her and said nothing. At that moment, Lin Xiao was walking in a dark space. She didn't know where she was and she didn't know why she kept walking. He didn't know how long he would have to walk and where he would stop. As she walked, she suddenly saw some light in front of her. She quickened her pace and saw an image from the bright spot. The place where the light penetrated was like a circular display screen. She saw that she was wearing a black military uniform, but behind her was a blazing black evil fire. She could feel a sense of familiarity from the flames, as if they were supposed to appear around her. Lin Xiao knew that this was the underworld flame that Du Yuanxing and the others had mentioned many times. The woman in the black military uniform was also her, because she looked exactly the same as her. But at this moment Lin Xiao's face was cold and fierce. His eyes shone with madness. Behind the woman was a cliff, and across from her were 5 men. She felt the powerful energy of these 5 men, and their level was no lower than Wu Changyue and Yang Chao. Lin Xiao saw that among the 5 men, the one in the middle was very beautiful. He had a feminine aura, and he opened his mouth to say something to her. She had coldly replied to him, and then the man seemed to fly into a rage out of humiliation. He said a few more words to her, and then her face became gloomy. Then he saw her on the screen, and the expression on his face suddenly turned into a maniacal smile. Her long hair began to dance without any wind, and with the black torch behind her, she looked like a witch coming into the world. Her military robe fluttered in the wind. A pair of beautiful long legs were wrapped in military trousers, and on her feet was a pair of high-heeled female military boots. She stood steadily on the edge of the cliff, and then laughed arrogantly. But Lin Xiao noticed that the black flames behind her began to shrink violently. Seeing the flames shrink, the faces of the men on the opposite side suddenly changed. Then they quickly retreated. But in the blink of an eye, Lin Xiao looked at herself, who was like a witch, and suddenly exploded. The black flames suddenly exploded, and instantly covered the area of 1,000 meters. Lin Xiao only felt that the whole scene turned black, and then the whole scene disappeared. These scenes should be her memories. But why didn't she feel that they had happened at all? Was she missing something? And that flame, it was very similar to her current black fog. When it was released, it was pitch black. Sure enough, she should quickly go to the edge of the cliff to have a look. Lin Xiao, who was puzzled, decided to go to the south to find that place by herself after the construction of the base stabilized. She had a premonition that this scene must be a sign for her. Maybe she could find back the memories she had lost in the past 5 years. For some reason, Lin Xiao started to walk back. She didn't know why, but she felt that she should go back now. At this time in the space, Little Vine's heavenly vine fell from the sky. It lifted the quilt on Lin Xiao's body, and then wrapped around her stomach, waist and legs. It picked her up from the bed, and then moved in the direction of the lake. Lin Xiao's body sank into the water, and then was wrapped into a jade-white vine cocooned by the vines that emerged from the water. This time, Little Vine didn't just use a few vines to wrap around Lin Xiao, but countless vines wrapped around Lin Xiao, slowly wrapping her into a huge vine ball. This vine ball almost filled the entire bottom of the lake. After Little Vine's heavenly vine appeared, Shun Yuzhen in the space and the zombie dogs in the forest all quietly hid, not daring to move. Outside the space, Yuan Tianqing and the others were discussing when to set off for the new base. Lin Wenwen subconsciously looked at the ceiling. But Sister Lu hasn't come out yet. Don't we need to wait for her? Yuan Tianqing thought for a moment and said, I don't think we need to wait for her. If she doesn't see us when she comes out, she should be gone. We don't know how long we have to wait for her. It's better to go there first, open the construction site, and build the base as soon as possible. Yuanqing asked, then should we continue the recruitment here? Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, continue, why not? Otherwise, when do you think we can build the base with just a few hundred people? Chapter 378. Yuanqing murmured, 300 or 400 people isn't a small number. It's just building a wall, we don't need that many people, right? Yuan Tianqing smiled and glanced at him. You think we don't need to clean up the buildings inside the wall? Don't we need to clean up the houses? Don't we need to clean up the roads? Yuanqing heard this and immediately thought of such a large area to clean up. He was a bit depressed. That's right, we still need to clean up the houses that can be lived in. Wow, there are so many abandoned cars on the road. If only we could get the zombies to help us pick up the garbage. Long Qingying said, that's a good idea. But you have to go find Miss Lu or Miss Cho Lily for help. Hearing that he had to deal with Lin Xiao or Cho Lily, the two terrifying zombies, Yuanqing shook his head and said, No, I think we can clean it up quickly. Lin Wenwen rolled his eyes and said, at least you don't have to worry about zombies suddenly attacking while you're working. Don't be dissatisfied. The others nodded. It was indeed so. When they were building the base, they had to send half of the people to guard it to prevent a sudden attack from the zombies. The other half of the people could then move the bricks and walls with peace of mind. At that time, everyone's state of mind was different from now. At that time, most people were afraid, desperate, panicked, and didn't know what to do. Unlike now, they were used to the environment of the apocalypse, and even the zombies were very familiar. 5 years, no matter what, they should be used to it. Yuan Tianqing said decisively, Old Du, you stay here and continue the recruitment work. I'll leave Junjie and Wenqing to help you. We'll wait for another day tomorrow. If Miss Lu still doesn't appear, then we'll leave at 4 in the afternoon, and should be there by 6. Everyone nodded and didn't say anything. On the other side, Wu Chengwei was wearing sportswear, carrying Wu Yueling back to the inner district. Along the way, he didn't say anything, although he maintained a smile on the corner of his mouth. But Meng Yu, who had been paying attention to him, found that he was distracted. Brother Yu, you've been inside for the whole night. Is it really okay? Meng Yu followed behind him and asked. Emily also believed that Wu Chengwei had arranged for her to stay in a house nearby. He had also assigned 2 level 5 metahumans to be her bodyguards. In any case, her reflexes and self-defense abilities were pretty good. As long as he didn't encounter a level 6 or 7 enemy, his life wouldn't be in danger. Hearing Meng Yu's words, Wu Chengwei walked to the sofa and put Wu Yueling down. He asked her to sit on the sofa and looked up at Meng Yu. Something did happen, but I'm afraid that you might not be able to take it if I tell you. Yu, for the past 5 years, I've always treated you as a friend or sister. You should know. Wu Chengwei put away the smile on his face and said to her seriously, sit down and let's have a good talk. Meng Yu looked at his expression and his words. Suddenly, she had a very bad premonition in her heart, giving her the urge to turn around and leave. However, she still obediently sat on the sofa next to him. Then he looked at Wu Chengwei, waiting for him to continue. Wu Chengwei thought for a moment and said to her, you've been working with me for the past few years. You're very capable. I like capable people. In front of outsiders, we're just superiors and subordinates. Back at home, we're just friends. But now, I've always treated you as a sister in my heart. I also hope that you can find a good man to accompany you for the rest of your life. The more Meng Yu listened to him, the more flustered she became. She suddenly said, Brother Yu, don't say it. However, Wu Chengwei didn't intend to stop. He continued, I don't know when you suddenly fell in love with me. It's not your fault. What's wrong is that I can't respond to your special feelings. Just like you can't respond to Yunlong's feelings for you now. I believe you can understand what I'm thinking, because they were all in the same situation. Mengyu had always been a calm woman, but at this time she suddenly stood up and said in a panic, "Brother Yu, the meal hasn't been cooked yet." "I'm going to cook," Wu Chonghua said. "Sit down. Let me finish what I have to say." Mengyu shook her head and looked at him. "No, I don't want to hear it." Wu Chonghua sighed and said, "Sit down. Even if I don't say it now, sooner or later I have to say it. Be obedient." Mengyu looked at him blankly for a moment, and then sat down in a daze. But her expression was somewhat painful and her mind was very confused. Why did her brother Yu suddenly say this to her? Although brother Yu had never given her a chance before, and always kept a distance from her. In order to avoid embarrassment, she lived here with Xiao Yunlong and the other two. But she never thought of giving up. She thought that one day, brother Yu would see her infatuation, and then perhaps wake up, and then accept her little by little. But now he wanted to make their relationship clear. His words indicated that he was going to refuse her now. Mengyu suddenly couldn't accept it. She didn't want to hear Wu Chonghua refuse her. She didn't want to hear it. But she didn't dare to disobey Wu Chonghua's words. She was afraid that Wu Chonghua would hate her because of this. Wu Chonghua looked at her expression and sighed in his heart. But there were some things that if he didn't say it, then the expectation in her heart would only grow deeper and deeper. Then in the end it might form a psychological suggestion, which would be very troublesome. He touched Wu Yueling's hair and said, "You said last time that I should find a mother for Lingling, so I have already started to think about it. You're not young anymore, don't waste your time on me. If you really don't want to accept Yunlong, then you can consider other people." Mengyu opened her eyes and looked at him. When she heard this, her nose couldn't help but turn sour and her eyes turned red. A feeling of grievance suddenly rose in her heart, making her want to cry. She suddenly stood up again, but this time she didn't say anything. He turned around and ran upstairs, rushing into his room. Wu Chonghua looked at her hurriedly running upstairs and sighed again. He said to Wu Yueling, "Dad made your Aunt Yu cry. What should we do? Won't the two of us have dinner tonight?" After the end of the world, because he had Lingling by his side, everyone thought that he was married. But he wasn't. Before the end of the world, he was still a bachelor. With his appearance and identity, there were certainly not a few women who liked him. But he was a picky man. If he didn't like them, he wouldn't touch them. Chapter 379. Later, after the end of the world came, on one hand, there was the great change of the apocalypse, and on the other hand there was Lingling. So along the way there were a lot of people following him. After building a base there was a place to stay. With Lingling, his mind at home was thinking about how to be a good father, and outside thinking about how to be a good leader. How to manage the base and provide a safe and comfortable place for the survivors to live. In a base without zombies there was food, drink, shelter and sleep. These needed him and the other two leaders to worry about. So the more people, the more problems. The more problems, the more busy he was. So busy he was not in the mood to think about emotional problems. When he discovered Mengyu's feelings, it was already a bit late. But as a companion who had always stayed by his side, he certainly could not drive a girl away. So he had to intentionally or unintentionally keep a distance from her, so that she could give up on this idea. But later he found that Mengyu was a persistent woman. So he originally planned to slowly pull away from her, and secretly help Xiao Yunlong create a lot of opportunities for the two of them. He just hoped that Xiao Yunlong could quickly chase after her, but it was useless. A stupid teammate would only hold him back. If it wasn't for the heavenly vine that the female zombie raised these 2 days, he really did not intend to directly explain it to Mengyu, because he knew how serious the impact of what he said now was to her. But he had already identified the female zombie, in order to avoid future misunderstandings and troubles. He must now make things clear to Mengyu, otherwise with her stubborn character, he did not know how she would react after knowing about him and the female zombie. Maybe she would do something irrational. When Wu Yueling heard his words, she blankly looked at the direction of the stairs where Mengyu left. Then she looked back at him with 2 big bright eyes, a face full of doubt. Wu Chonghua said, "Lingling, sit here, Dad will go cook." "Okay. Are you hungry?" Wu Yueling nodded, then obediently sat on the sofa. Wu Chonghua stood up and walked towards the kitchen. But in his mind he thought that in this situation, he had to let Mengyu be alone, maybe she would get over it. He also had to send people to investigate the identity of the female zombie. He didn't even know her full name. She only knew that she was called Miss Lu, and she had called herself Lin Xiang last time. What forest? And that face of hers. I don't know why. The more he thought about it, the more familiar it seemed. He might have seen it somewhere before. He just couldn't remember. There was another problem. That female zombie seemed. Maybe. It seemed. She didn't know that the person who ate her yesterday was him? I wonder what her reaction will be when she finds out? Thinking of this, Wu Chengyue's mood suddenly improved. The depression brought by Mengyu just now was slightly relieved, making him feel a lot more relaxed. While Wu Chengyue went to the kitchen to cook, Yuan Tianxing and the others also started to eat dinner. In the space, Lin Xiao was wrapped in a huge rattan ball. She had already lost consciousness. No one knew that the huge vine was dissipating bit by bit. That's right, it dissipated. But at the same time, a breath began to slowly seep into Lin Xiao's womb. This aura belonged to little Man. Aside from everything under the water, there was no other change in the space. That night, Wu Chengyue called Xiao Liqing to the study. He gave him a task to do. This task was to investigate the detailed information of the female zombie. Xiao Liqing went to do the task with a blank face. He wondered why their leader sent him to investigate other people's accounts. Then when Xiao Liqing made his move, Kong Qingming immediately received the news. I felt that you were a little strange that time. What are you doing? Chapter 380. But Lu Qianni quickly asked him a question that immediately made him unable to sit still. Hey, by the way, I clearly told you to knock on Lin Wenwen's door that night. Why did you suddenly drag me over? I just felt that you were a little strange that time. What are you doing? Kong Qingming's beautiful face froze for a moment, and a trace of surprise flashed in his long and narrow eyes. He thought of that cold face that day, although the facial features were not very delicate. But that pair of sharp eyes left a deep impression on him, and he could still feel the other party's knife-like eyesight. I just felt that the eyes of the woman with the hair were inexplicably a little scary. I couldn't hold her back, so I subconsciously dragged you over. In fact, I don't know what's going on. Hearing his somewhat dazed answer, Lu Qianni's eyes lit up. He suddenly uncrossed his hands in front of his chest, stared at him with interest and stood up. Then he walked around the desk to stand in front of Kong Qingming, stood up and bent down to stare at his face. Qingming, do you feel that your face right now is a little hot? Kong Qingming was stunned for a moment, and then subconsciously reached out to touch his face. Then Lu Qianni laughed. Ha 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 ha. Then he just laughed merrily and said nothing. Kong Qingming looked at him with a puzzled expression. Seeing that he kept laughing, he asked angrily, if you have something to say, say it. Why are you laughing like a ghost? Lu Qianni covered his forehead and laughed. He waved his hand at him and walked back to his seat to sit down. Ha ha ha. Let me laugh, I can't help it now. Kong Qingming's face darkened from his laughter, and he glared at him. Tell me clearly. Lu Qianni reluctantly stopped laughing, then looked at him and asked, how about this, you answer a few questions for me first. Did you feel a jolt in your heart when you saw her sharp eyes that day? Kong Qingming thought of that ordinary but clean face, but his attention was still shocked by that pair of eyes. He nodded. Lu Qianni continued to ask, so at that time did you subconsciously feel a little flustered, and then your body moved a step faster than your brain to escape? Kong Qingming's situation at that time was indeed a subconscious action of his body, and his brain was at a loss at that time. He nodded. Lu Qianni smiled again. He put his hands on the table and rested his forehead on his hands. Ha 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 ha. Kong Qingming felt sick from his laughter. He couldn't help but curse, can you stop laughing? Can you speak properly? Only then did Lu Qianni raise his head and look at him amusedly. Qingming, your ability to do things is quite strong. Why are you so slow in this aspect? Kong Qingming looked at him with question marks on his head. In this aspect? Which aspect? Lu Qianni looked at him a few times, but shook his head and said, well, I think it's more meaningful for you to discover it yourself. I won't talk about it. Listen to me, remember to follow your heart and do what you want to do. Kong Qingming was annoyed to death by him. Wasn't it the same as not saying anything at all? What are you talking about? Why can't I understand a single word? Lu Tianyi shook his head and said nothing. After that, no matter how Kong Qingming asked, he just smiled at him. In the end, Kong Qingming left laughing so hard that smoke was coming out of his 7 orifices. When he left, he didn't know if it was because of the woman he mentioned just now. That indifferent face kept appearing in his mind. She was plain-looking but very clean. Also, she had a strong temperament, but she kept people thousands of miles away. Her figure was quite good. In the afternoon, Yuan Tianqing left the base in Haicheng with Lin Wenlong, Qingying and Lu Junjie. They went to the uptown of Hangzhou. However, Mrs. Lin quickly changed the topic and suddenly asked, "By the way, didn't Miss Lu come back with you?" And Yuanqing. Lin Wenwen replied, "Oh, Sister Lu is not here yet. As for Du Yuanqing, he stayed in Haicheng to continue recruiting workers. We need more people to come here." Chapter 381. There were 2 kinds of recruitment notices that they put out afterwards. One kind was for pure workers who only came to do work. The other kind was for base residents, who could accept people who wanted to change the environment of the new base. Anyway, as long as they weren't too bad or evil, or humans like the bandits in the Doomsday, they would accept them. Of course, there were many conditions to join, and their position in the base would be assigned according to their contributions to the new base. This was the rule of every base. Mrs. Lin asked with concern, "Miss Lu, what's the matter?" Lin Wenwen said with a smile she should be fine. "Oh, let me tell you what happened in High City yesterday." Hearing this, the others immediately looked over curiously. Only Mrs. Lin looked a little worried, but she didn't continue to ask. Instead, she walked into the hall with the others. Yuan Tianqing said to Chen Yuding and Lin Feng, "Oh, yesterday Yang Chao and his group of people in High City were kicked out by Leader Wu and Leader Zhou. Yang Chao is dead." Hearing this news, Chen Yuding and the others who had just walked into the hotel hall were stunned. They stopped and looked at them in disbelief. "What? He's dead? How could it be so sudden? Our leader didn't plan to do anything, did he?" Chen Yuding asked in surprise. Yuan Tianqing walked straight to the clean sofas in the hall and said, "In fact, something happened the night you left. That's why Leader Wu quickly counterattacked. But this is still the result of someone stirring up trouble inside." He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Chen Yuding and the others sat around him curiously and asked, "Tell me what happened?" Yuan Tianqing said, "That night, one of Yang Chao's deputy leaders died. That guy, Pu Rukang, was bitten by a zombie that came out of nowhere. Then, for some reason, he ran into Haicheng's research institute and fought with someone in the institute. In the end, he was attacked from behind and another researcher died because of it." Hearing the name Pu Luotsang, Chen Yuding was stunned for a moment. But soon he looked at Yuan Tianqing in shock. "What did you say? Pu Luotsang is dead? Was that person looking for trouble with him before?" However, Chen Yuding still didn't know that Pu Zhitsang was the mastermind behind little Zhang's death. Now he was just very surprised. That person had caused trouble for him not long ago. How did he suddenly die? Yuan Tianqing said, "Yes, they're not the only ones who died. And Yang Chao's sister Yang Yan." Lin Feng and the others looked at him curiously and asked, Was it the woman who allowed the kids to harass Wenwen? How did she die? Who did it?" After that, they subconsciously looked at Lin Wenwen. Yuan Tianqing also glanced at Lin Wenwen and replied, "Miss Lu said she did it, but I heard that the woman's head, shoulder, and entire arm were bitten off by something. It was extremely tragic. And I heard that when she died, none of her people saw how she died." Lin Feng and the others looked at each other in surprise and asked, "Miss Lu? How did she get involved?" Yuan Tianqing said, "We're not sure about that, but that's what she said. She also found out that Yang Chao brought a level 7 paranormal helper to Haicheng base. The next day, at their high-level meeting, they directly took action. The reason was that Yang Chao secretly used hundreds of people in Haicheng base to do some virus experiments. All of them died, and he and some of his men were also infected with the virus. In the end, they turned into monsters that were neither humans nor zombies and were killed." "You said he used living people to do experiments? Oh my God! Mrs. Lin exclaimed in shock. After all, after the end of the world, the population was already small. Yang Chao actually used living people to do experiments. This was too much of a psychopath. Moreover, from Yuan Tianqing's words, it seemed like those people had been secretly captured by him and had not gone willingly. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, Yang Chao thought that your own experiments didn't find anything, but Leader Wu already knew about him. So he directly exposed this matter that day, and then cooperated with another leader in Haiqing base to expel Yang Chao. Chen Yuding's face was full of anger when he heard that Yuan Tianqing only expelled Yang Chao. He asked with some dissatisfaction, why only expel? This kind of person should be killed. He thought about how his Shaozhen was also infected by his people, and how they usually harm innocent people. Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, expelling him is only the first step, to remove his identity. The second step is the key. The second step is to punish him with the hundreds of people he killed, so that the people can be accounted for. Chen Yuding finally calmed down and nodded. That's true, Lin Feng said. Captain Chen, don't be angry. Tianqing just said that Yang Chao is also dead. So the people who should die are also dead. After comforting Chen Yuding, Lin Feng asked, what happened next? What happened next? Yuan Tianqing said, Yang Chao turned into a monster, and then he was killed by Leader Wu and the others. But I heard that his helper saw that the situation wasn't good and turned around to escape. What? He ran away? Didn't Yang Chao die of anger? Mrs. Lin said in surprise. Yuan Tianqing smiled and nodded. Maybe. We weren't there, so we don't know his reaction. The others looked at each other. Imagining the scene back then, he couldn't help but want to laugh. So where did he find such an unreliable helper? By the way, who is the helper? Mrs. Lin thought it was funny and then asked curiously. Lin Wenwen said, Sister Lu said that he is a bandit during the apocalypse. Bandits? This Yang Chao was indeed a lunatic. Not only did he turn himself into a monster, he even colluded with the robbers outside. They can do anything. Mrs. Lin exclaimed. Yuan Tianqing suddenly thought of something and said with a serious expression, right, speaking of these bandits, we still have to be careful. Miss Lu said that he had been watching us the whole night. His target should be Wenwen. Now that Yang Chao had fallen from power and he had been chased away. But he's a robber, so it's hard to say whether he'll continue to follow us. Hearing that a level 7 Doomsday Bandit might be targeting them, they were shocked. The members of the Lin family immediately became vigilant. That's possible. The bandits of the post-apocalyptic world were very vengeful, and they would do anything to get what they wanted. If he has his eyes on us, we'll be in trouble. Lin Feng's face darkened. Chapter 382. What's there to be afraid of? If he dares to come, I'll make him die here. A clear voice came. Everyone looked back and saw two girls, one beautiful and one ugly, coming out from the stairs. Qiu Lily swung her long black hair and came out with another girl with scales on her face. Lu Jun followed behind them with Tong Tong in her arms. The others looked at the two of them and felt a strong contrast. Lu Jun looked at Lin Wenwen's short hair and asked curiously, Hey, Miss Wenwen, what's wrong with your hair? Lin Wenwen smiled at her and said, Oh, it's nothing. I cut it myself. Lu Jun stared at her hair for a few seconds and couldn't help but say with pity, What a pity, your long hair is very beautiful. Lin Wenwen just smiled and didn't speak. Lu Jun said, Your hair needs to be fixed, do you need my help? Lin Wenwen's eyes lit up and said, Hey, can I? Lu Jun nodded with a smile. She said, I used to be a fashion designer, but after the apocalypse people didn't pay much attention to this aspect, so I also lost my job. Cheng Wangshua looked at her in surprise and said, So that's how it is. No wonder I always feel that even if you just tie your hair casually behind your head. But it also suits you very well. Lu Jun just smiled faintly and said, Although my skills have stopped for a few years, I can still fix it for Miss Wenwen. I think you must want to cut it for her because you can't stand her hairstyle. In fact, I've been tolerating it for a long time. Long Qingying suddenly said. Lin Wenwen glared at her and said, Didn't you cut this hairstyle for me? How dare you dislike it? Long Qingying shrugged and said with a blank face, I don't know how to cut it, but you still asked me to do it. It's my fault. Lin Wenwen was speechless. Chun Yuding asked uneasily, Miss Lu, when will she come back? Yuan Tianqing looked at him and said, we don't know her situation, but she will come back. Qiu Lily stood next to them with her arms crossed and said, Xiao Qiao seems to be upgrading little man. Maybe she will come back in a few days. Since all of you are here, we can start work tomorrow. Lin Feng and Yuan Tianqing both nodded and said, let's have a meeting here tomorrow morning to discuss where to start the construction. Everyone nodded. The girls didn't say anything. Anyway, they had nothing to do tomorrow. Alright, it's almost time to eat. Let's go to the restaurant. Lin Feng patted his knees and stood up. Lin Luoran walks to Mrs. Lin and takes Lin Xiaolu to the dining room. The others stood up one after another and followed him to the restaurant. As for Wu Changyue, he didn't see Mengyu for the whole day. He didn't know if he was still in his room or if he had already gone out. In any case, he might have intentionally avoided Wu Changyue. Wu Changyue knew her current mood, but he couldn't interfere too much, so he didn't care. After breakfast, he took Wu Yueling out to work. At noon, Xiao Liqing came back with a strange look on his face and reported, Chief, Miss Lu's information. We can't get any information on her. Wu Changyue was stunned. He put down the documents in his hands and looked up at him. Sealed? Who sealed it? Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure. I asked people from the former base. They all kept quiet. I think they're hiding Miss Lu's identity on purpose. By the way, Chief, why do you suddenly want to know her information? Wu Changyue looked down thoughtfully and murmured, why did Yuan Tianqing and the others hide the information from her? Xiao Liqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure. Should we continue to investigate? Wu Changyue smiled and said, of course. Of course they would. Why wouldn't they? The more they hide something, the more we want to know. That's more interesting. Xiao Liqing nodded and said, okay. Then I'll continue to find out more information. Wu Changyue said, go. But ask Li Yushan to keep an eye on their new base and the neighborhood where Yuan Tianqing lived. Report to me immediately if there's any trace of Miss Lu. Xiao Liqing looked at him strangely and asked in confusion, Chief, is there a problem with Miss Lu? Why did you ask Yushan to keep an eye on her? Wu Changyue just smiled mysteriously at him and said, you'll know the reason after the recent matters in the base are settled. By the way, remember not to let Mengyu know about the matter. I asked you to investigate Miss Lu. Yes. Xiao Liqing stood in front of his desk and was confused by his attitude. His head was full of question marks, but seeing that Wu Changyue didn't want to say it, he could only suppress his curiosity and go do his work. After watching Xiao Liqing leave, Wu Changyue thought it was strange why Yuan Tianqing and the others hid the female zombie's information. The female zombie's surname was Lu, so who was she before she died? Also, why did the face that had been restored look a little familiar? But he didn't expect that after she turned into a zombie, her body could actually recover to its original state. Thinking of this, a strange feeling flashed through Wu Changyue's heart. Even the smile in his eyes deepened with the strange feeling in his heart, but he didn't realize it himself. She came with Yuan Tianqing, so she should be from the Hades King's base. But Wu Changyue didn't understand. Was her identity so secret? Why didn't he let people investigate? But how could he not let him investigate? He had to investigate the background of the female zombie he wanted to marry. He didn't know if what the heavenly vine said about turning into a baby was true. If it was true, then how did it turn into a baby? Did it really borrow his and the female zombie's relationship, and then make the female zombie pregnant? It was unbelievable just thinking about it. If that was the case, then the baby's soul might be that heavenly vine, right? So that heavenly vine borrowed his seed and the female zombie's ovum to create a body? Wu Changyue slightly lowered his head and looked at his lower abdomen with a strange expression. Could it be that he had been scammed by a mutated plant with a high IQ, and his sperm had been borrowed? Then it made a biological child for him? After suddenly realizing the truth, Wu Changyue's expression was dumbfounded. He stared at his lower abdomen, and then he felt his whole body was in trouble. Damn! Did it become a spirit after the apocalypse? Where did this vine spirit come from? How dare it trick his next generation? Ah! What kind of world was this? It was fine that he was cheated by a hateful woman last time, but why was he cheated by a mutated plant now? What a good little man, she dared to cheat him, her father, before she was even born. Let's see how I'll deal with her after she's born. But for now he had to deal with her mother. Chapter 383. Just as Wu Chengyue was staring at his little brother in a daze, the office door suddenly opened. Xiao Yunlong rushed in and said angrily to him, "What did you say to Yu? Wu Chengyue recovered and looked up at him. Not caring about his attitude, he just asked indifferently, "What happened to her?" Xiao Yunlong glared at him angrily and said, "Tell me what you said to her first? Why is she so haggard like she has lost her soul? She didn't sleep all night last night. And her eyes are swollen from crying. She didn't even dare to go out today." Wu Chengyue stood up and came out from the desk. As he walked he said to him, "Calm down first." Then he went to the sofa where Wu Yueling was sitting and sat down, pointing to the sofa next to him. Xiao Yunlong came over angrily, sat down and said, "Tell me what happened? Did you say anything after you went back yesterday? Otherwise how could you, who is usually so calm, become like this?" Wu Chengyue said, "I have already laid it out with her. I know she can't bear it, but I don't have much time on my side. If I don't tell her now, it will be too late in the future." Xiao Yunlong was taken aback for a moment, the anger on his face slightly subsiding. He then asked, "What's the matter with you? Why did you suddenly lay it out with her?" Wu Chengyue said, "Because I am going to find a mother for Lingling, so now I want her to cut off those thoughts about me as soon as possible, so that she won't have any objections when I bring her back." Xiao Yunlong stared at him with wide eyes, somewhat surprised. You, what did you say? You are going to get married? Find a stepmother for Lingling? What about Lingling? What if the woman you marry bullies my goddaughter behind my back? Who is she?" Wu Chengyue looked at his reaction with amusement and said indifferently, "Don't be so excited. It's me who married her, not you. Why are you so worried? If a woman who will hurt Lingling, do you think I will marry her? Is my character and IQ that bad?" Xiao Yunlong sat there with his back straight, looking at him with a confused expression. "No? You really want to find a woman? Are you serious?" Wu Chengyue said, "The rice has been cooked. Don't you want to continue eating?" Xiao Yunlong once again stared at him as if he had seen a ghost. "Last time you were also cooked into rice by her. Why didn't I see you marry her back?" Wu Chengyue was stunned, and then stared at him expressionlessly. "Can I marry you like that last time? Why don't you take a look at what kind of woman she is? If I let a scumbag rape you, you have to marry her back for me." Xiao Yunlong immediately withered. "Forget about that, I can't afford it. So that's why you told you about this? What kind of person is he? What's his background?" Wu Chengyue shook his head and said, "You'll know in the future. But we haven't found out her background yet." Xiao Yunlong looked him up and down and said with a somewhat strange expression, "I remember that you seem to have gone to Yuan Tianxing's place to pick up Lingling that day. So you went back last night, so it was to do this. There are only 2 women over there. It's either Lin Wenwen or the woman with the katana next to her. You wouldn't have slept with one of them, right?" As he said this, he frowned and thought that it didn't seem right. "Well, we all know Lin Wenwen's background, but you just said that you didn't find out her background. Wouldn't it be the woman with the katana? Called Long Qing or something?" Wu Chengyue shook his head at him and said, "You think too much, it's not them." Then he saw Xiao Yunlong looking at him with a strange expression. Not them. Then who else could it be? Did you run into some luck and ran into the bushes?" Wu Chengyue sighed and waved his hand at him. "Oh, forget it. It would be strange if you could guess it with your IQ. Now that I have offended you, it's very embarrassing to see her. Therefore, Lingling and I will be staying here for a period of time. You should take this opportunity to persuade her." I go persuade her? She has always listened to you." Hearing Wu Chengyue telling him to comfort Mingyu, Xiao Yunlong said a little helplessly. Wu Chengyue stood up and said, "You're not going? If you're not going, I'll let little Chung go. Little Chung, come in." As he spoke, he suddenly shouted towards the door and walked towards his desk. Xiao Yunlong looked at him with a confused face. He said to let Xiao Liqing comfort Mingyu. Did this mean that he wanted to matchmake the 2 of them? Seeing Xiao Liqing open the door and come in, he immediately stood up in fright. He said, "I'll go. Why do you want little Chung to go? He can't speak, As he said this, he immediately turned around and walked out. Xiao Liqing looked blankly at the two people, and then looked at the tall back of Xiao Yunlong walking out. After Wu Chengyue watched Xiao Yunlong go out, he sat at his desk and said to Xiao Liqing, "I will live here with Lingling during this period of time. Go back and pack my and Lingling's clothes." Xiao Liqing nodded yes. Wu Chengyue waved his hand to him. Go? Wu Yueling had been sitting and playing by herself, not at all concerned about the words of the adults. At this time she looked up at the drawing board in her hand. She put down the pen and then slid down the drawing board. Stepping on her small shoes, she ran over to Wu Chengyue holding the drawing board. Wu Chengyue was about to start processing the information, but stopped when he saw her movements. Then he turned his head to look at her. Then he saw her running over with her short legs, and then leaning against his leg, she handed him the drawing board in her hand. What did Lingling draw? Wu Chengyue lovingly stroked her head and asked. Then he turned his head and saw the pattern drawn by Wu Yueling on the drawing board. Children's drawings were always very abstract, probably just a rough drawing, and then a simple distribution of colors. But a child's drawing could still tell something. Well, there were 3 people. 2 adults and a child in the middle. But why was one of the adults bald? He pointed to the little person in the middle, looked at Wu Yueling and asked, "Well, Lingling, you drew this, is it you?" Wu Yueling looked at him with sparkling eyes and nodded to him. Wu Chengyue pointed to the 2 adults with longer hair and asked, "Then who is this?" Wu Yueling pointed to him and just looked at him without saying a word. Wu Chengyue continued to point to the last bald head and asked, "Then who is this?" Wu Yueling's expression was a little confused. Then she pointed to her head, and then rubbed her hands. Perhaps she felt that the expression was not clear enough, so she looked left and right, not knowing what she was looking for. Suddenly she gestured in front of her chest, drawing 2 circular arcs. Wu Chengyue was dumbfounded as he looked at his pure and adorable baby daughter suddenly become dirty. Chapter 384. Just like that, Wu Chengyue sent people to investigate Lin Xiao's background, but it didn't go well. On the other hand, he sent people to guard Lin Xiao's new base, but Lin Xiao didn't appear. In less than 2 days, a group of strange people suddenly entered their Sea City base. Then they directly came to Wu Chengyue's office. There were 2 people who came and they also brought a big dog. It was a mutant wolf dog, tall and powerful, with an overbearing aura. The 2 people who came were not simple either because one of them was a level 7 ability user, and the other was not low either, at level 6. Moreover, the dog's level was unusually high. Xiao Liqing brought the 2 people and the dog to the door of Wu Chengyue's office, and said to the 2 people, "Wait a moment, our leader is inside." Lei Cheng and his people stopped in their tracks. His handsome face was expressionless, and he didn't say anything. Xiao Liqing turned around and knocked on Wu Chengyue's door, then pushed it open and took half a step inside. "Leader, they're here." Wu Chengyue, who was sitting at his desk dealing with documents, immediately put down the pen in his hand and casually stamped the document. Then he stood up and walked out of the chair. "Let them in." Xiao Liqing took a step outside, then made a gesture to the people outside to invite them in. When he opened the door, he saw 2 tall and strong men walking in. Behind them was a quiet big dog. Wu Chengyue took a look at their dog, then smiled at them and said, "Hello, I'm Wu Chengyue. How should I address you 2? The 2 men were about the same height, but the one who spoke was slightly shorter and had delicate and handsome features. He said expressionlessly, "My name is Lei Cheng, and he is Zheng Hao." Wu Chengyue gestured to the sofa and said, "Please sit. Oh, by the way, you can see that I have a child here, so your dog. Can I trouble you to ask it to wait outside?" As he spoke, he looked apologetically at the dog that was as tall as an adult's thigh. Since the dog came in, it had been quietly following Lei Cheng's feet. It didn't look up or sniff around. Although it wasn't leashed, it didn't leave a step away from Lei Cheng. Wherever Lei Cheng went, it would follow. Hearing Wu Chengyue's request, Lei Cheng didn't show any dissatisfaction. He just lowered his head slightly and said to the dog, "Early Eye, go out and guard the door." The wolfhound heard his words and looked up at him. He immediately turned around and walked towards the door with his tail drooping. Wu Chongyue knew that the mutant dog's IQ was very high. Furthermore, it was very intelligent and could understand simple human speech. Therefore, when the dog was called out by its owner, it obediently walked out. Wu Chongyue did not find it strange. Mutated animals and plants had one thing in common, which was that they were easily stimulated and went crazy. Once he was affected by something and went crazy, it would be very troublesome. When Wu Yueling saw a stranger come in, she immediately turned around and ran to the lounge next to her. After they sat down, Xiao Liqing poured them 2 glasses of water and placed them on the table. Then he stood in the corner next to Wu Chongyue as the background. Wu Chongyue said, "May I know where you two are from? Is there anything I can help you with?" There must be something going on for someone he didn't know to come looking for him. If they weren't here to cause trouble, then of course they were here to ask for help. Lei Cheng looked at him and said, "We're here to ask about Tang He." Wu Chongyue was stunned. He didn't seem to have heard of this name. So he asked doubtfully, "Allow me to ask, who is Tang He?" Lei Cheng glanced at Zheng Hao next to him. Then Zheng Hao took out a piece of A4 paper from the bag in his hand. There was a photo on the paper. Then he handed it to Wu Chongyue. "Leader Wu, this person is Tang He. Maybe you don't know his name, but I think many of you should have seen him," Zheng Hao said after handing over the information. Wu Chongyue took a look at the photo and immediately recognized that this was Yang Chao's helper who was pointed out by the female zombie in the conference hall that day. He said in surprise, "It's him? You're looking for him?" Lei Cheng said, "This person is a traitor of our base. He escaped because he committed a serious crime in our base. We were sent by the base to capture him and report back." Wu Chongyue looked at the two of them and said, "So that's how it is. But this Tang He seems to be a level 7 metal-type metahuman, an attack-type metahuman. If it's just the two of you, it seems like it'll be very difficult to catch him, right?" He didn't say that even if the two of them worked together, they probably wouldn't be able to catch Tang He. A level 7 metahuman was already a very rare powerhouse. Not to mention their powerful attack power. Even if there were 2 metahumans of the same level, it would be very difficult to win if it wasn't for the difference in attributes, let alone capturing someone. Moreover, if a level 7 metahuman wanted to escape, it would be very easy. Lei Cheng nodded and said, "I know what you mean, but this time it's not just the two of us. So you don't have to worry about it." Wu Chongyue looked at him and suddenly asked with a light smile, "Your arrest team can send a level 7 and a level 6 metahuman. Can I know where you are from? Could it be that you came from the Wuxia base in the capital?" Wuxia base is the largest survivor base in the country. There are 7 leaders there, and all of them are level 8 metahumans. Currently, among the major bases in the country, only China has so many level 8 metahumans. Therefore, China is now a strong base that doesn't fear anyone. The living conditions and environment there are naturally better, safer, and more high-end than these level 2 bases. Of course, Wuxia base still recruits residents. But to enter you need to have zombie cores, and you have to pay the corresponding crystal cores every month for how long you stay. If you don't have them, then you will be directly kicked out. Wu Chongyue felt that a level 7 metahuman came here randomly. Most likely he came from there because their base is not far from Wuxia base. However, Lei Cheng shook his head and said, "It's not convenient for us to disclose information about our base. But I can tell you that we have nothing to do with Wuxia base." Wu Chongyue looked at him with some surprise and said, "Oh? Is that so? Alright then, I asked too much. I'm sorry." Lei Cheng's face was expressionless, and he said carelessly, "It's alright, Leader Wu, don't worry about it. Now we just need to trouble you to tell us what was the situation when Tang He left last time. This is our reward for exchanging information." As he spoke, he suddenly took out a zombie core and placed it in front of Wu Chongyue. This was the zombie core of a level 6 zombie king. Chapter 385. Wu Chongyue looked at the zombie core and thought about whether he would be able to smoothly enter level 8 after absorbing it. If so, then it could directly make up for the gap in strength after Yang Chao's death. "Oh, he seems to be a helper invited by another traitor in our base. But I don't know why he suddenly ran away when we were fighting." Lei Cheng didn't say anything, but Zheng Hao said in surprise, "Hey, you have a traitor here? 2 traitors together." Sure enough, birds of a feather flocked together. Wu Chongyue spread his hands and said, "The leader of my base secretly experimented on living people in the base, so the other leader and I had to get rid of him." Lei Cheng said, "Then you didn't catch Tang He that day?" "He only cared about the news of Tang He." Wu Chongyue said, "We really didn't catch him. It was our leader Zhou who chased him that day. But it didn't take long for him to run out of the base, so we didn't continue to chase him. He didn't seem to have any intention of fighting us." Hearing this, Lei Cheng didn't ask any more questions, but directly stood up. He politely nodded to Wu Chongyue. "This information is enough, thank you, Leader Wu. Then we won't disturb you." Wu Chongyue also stood up, seeing that they were in a hurry to leave. He asked in surprise, "Huh? Why are you leaving so soon?" Lei Cheng shook his head and said, "We have a mission, so we won't stay any longer. Thank you for your kindness." Wu Chongyue had to say to them, "Okay, take care. Xiaocheng, see them out," he said as he sent the two to the door, but didn't continue to send them out. Instead, he let Xiao Liqing see them out. Xiao Liqing sent them out of the base, then came back to report. "They left the base, leader. Do you know where they came from?" Wu Chongyue shook his head and said, "I don't know. But looking at them, it seems that they are indeed looking for the level 7 psychic called Tang He." Xiao Liqing nodded. Wu Chongyue asked him, "You still haven't investigated the background of that female zombie?" Xiao Liqing shook his head at him innocently. It was not that he was incapable. They really couldn't find anything, and Yuan Tianqing and the others had long left the base. He could only find out from the people who stayed behind. However, that rank 5 ability user called Du Yuanqing, although he was usually a little brainless, he was very stubborn about this matter. No matter what they did, they couldn't get anything out of him. Wu Chongyue stroked his chin and said, "It's been so long, yet we still haven't found anything. Isn't this female zombie too mysterious?" While Wu Chongyue was ferociously investigating Lin Xiao was still wrapped in the rattan ball. However, after a few days, the originally huge rattan ball had shrunk by 1/3. But there were still 2/3 that continued to drill into her. Shen Yuzhen, who was on the shore of the lake, still stared at the lake from time to time. However, after waiting for a few days, Lin Xiao did not come up. Ever since she saw Wu Chongyue walk into the lake naked that day, Shen Yuzhen had been wondering if the situation below was what she thought it was. Lin Xiao, who was in front, went down naked, and Wu Chongyue also went down naked. A man, a woman, what were the two of them doing at the bottom of the lake without any clothes on? Moreover, Wu Chongyue carried Lin Xiao up. If the two of them were still fine, who would believe it? However, after Wu Chongyue left, the rattan brought Lin Xiao into the lake again, and she still hadn't come out. Who knew what she was doing down there for so long? At this time, Lin Xiao, who was at the bottom of the lake, was in a state of suspended consciousness. Little man's main body, the rattan, turned into a condensed energy that seeped into her body. This energy nourished each of Lin Xiao's muscles, activated the cells inside, and then purified the blood in her veins. The cells that were previously activated were filtered out again. Then the discarded cells were burned by a wave of black gas. After being repaired by little man's energy, the dead cells in Lin Xiao's body had basically been slowly replaced. Only the cells of the internal organs were still in the process of being manufactured. Right now, Lin Xiao's body was being repaired by little man's powerful energy. She was doing the last step of the repair, which was her intestines. The intestines that were originally hollowed out were growing out bit by bit. Meanwhile, little man's other energy and her aura were gathering bit by bit towards Lin Xiao's lower abdomen. There was also a very masculine energy circling there. When little man's aura and energy entered these masculine energy domains, the few of them mixed together. Then they began to rotate and slowly fuse. However, the fusion here was much slower than the regeneration of Lin Xiao's cells. The intestines in Lin Xiao's stomach were also growing very slowly. The living blood in her body that had been purified began to flow back towards her heart. At this time in the Netherworld King's base, in the meeting room of the government building, a slender and straight figure stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking at the base that had lost a lot of people. He had shoulder-length hair and a handsome face. A pair of long and narrow eyes, the corners of his eyes were raised upwards, and his eyebrows were light. He had a high nose bridge and sexy thin lips. The corners of his mouth carried a trace of a confident smile. There was an inexplicable luster in his eyes as he looked out of the window. It was as warm and moist as water, but it seemed to reveal a kind of temptation, delicate but unidentifiable androgynous facial features, and because of his slightly long hair, there was a bit of femininity. He stood there, his whole body exuding a kind of elegant aura. At this moment, the door of the meeting room suddenly opened, and a soldier stood at the door. "Leader. Deputy Leader Yang is back." Long Yubai turned around and smiled gently at the soldier. "Is he back? Let him in." The soldier looked at his smile, and there was a second of infatuation in his expression. But soon, he covered it up and turned around to leave. Then he saw Yang Jianhua walk in. Yang Jianhua walked in wearing a white suit. After seeing Long Yubai, a ray of light flashed in his eyes. He strode over and hugged Long Yubai's slender and straight body from behind. Then he leaned his face close to Long Yubai's ear and took a deep breath, looking at him in fascination. "Have you thought about it?" There was still a faint smile on Long Yubai's beautiful face. He turned slightly and said to him, "How did it go?" Yang Jianhua was stunned, and then he said indifferently, "They ran away. I have already chased them for a long time. I believe they won't come back." Long Yubai smiled, but a cold light flashed in his eyes. He said, "Come back." Chapter 386. Yang Jianhua's handsome face had a flattering smile as he said, "I was about to succeed, but Yuan Tianqing suddenly appeared. With him around, I couldn't kill all of them." Long Yubai pulled his arm away, then took a step back, turned around and walked toward the desk. After being pulled away, Yang Jianhua's eyes flashed with a trace of grievance. However, he didn't show it. Instead, he turned around and walked behind Long Yubai. "So you went for so long, but in the end you came back empty-handed? And you came back alone? Did you abandon the 10 chariots I sent you?" Long Yubai asked him as he walked. Yang Jianhua walked behind him. When he was about to sit in the chair, he suddenly reached out and grabbed him. Then, he pulled him back forcefully and said to him with some dissatisfaction, "What? Do you care whether those people died or not? Do you care about your chariots? What about me?" Long Yubai's body wasn't as tall as Yang Jianhua. When Yang Jianhua pulled him back, he bumped into his arms and was hugged again. Hearing Yang Jianhua's words, he sighed and said, "But we spent a lot of effort to build those chariots. In the end we gave them to you, but you threw them outside. It doesn't matter if you didn't kill them. Anyway, they can't do anything." Yang Jianhua said to him, "It's good that you know. It's my fault for losing the chariots. But it can't be helped. I met someone stronger than me. I can only save my life first. If I can rise to rank 7, I'll definitely be able to survive. If I can reach rank 7, this operation will definitely not fail." Long Yubai lowered his face slightly on his chest. From Yang Jianhua's angle, he could only see his slightly drooping long eyelashes. However, he couldn't see a trace of displeasure flashing in his eyes under his eyelashes. He raised his head and looked at him with a pair of watery eyes. "Jianhua, I said that when you come back with me to the Earth Dragon base, I'll give you the rank 6 corpse core. I'll let you directly break through to rank 7, but you refused to go back with me. What's there to stay here for?" Yang Jianhua looked at his eyes and handsome and delicate face. His eyes fell on his lips, and he inexplicably felt that his throat was a little dry. He lowered his head and kissed Long Yubai's lips. Her wet tongue hurriedly swept across Long Yubai's lips, then pried open his teeth and burrowed in. Then she forcefully swept her tongue across his mouth. Long Yubai narrowed his eyes slightly and allowed Yang Jianhua to stir the food in his mouth, as he placed his hands on Yang Jianhua's firm chest muscles. She gently caressed him and then hooked the back of his neck. The two kissed passionately for a while before separating. Yang Jianhua calmed his breathing and rubbed his lower body against Long Yubai's. Long Yubai raised his somewhat hazy eyes and looked at him, saying, "Since you're back, come back to the Earth Dragon with me." Yang Jianhua calmed himself down and said, "Didn't you promise to hand over the Netherworld King's base to me? Why do you want me to go to the Earth Dragon with you now?" Long Yubai said, "But the two bases are hundreds of kilometers away from each other. Then you won't be able to follow me around every day, right?" However, Yang Jianhua said, Why must I follow them? Isn't it good for me to stay here? This base belongs to me now. Wouldn't it be too wasteful to give it up like this? Long Yubai stared into his eyes for a while before saying, Is it because you can't give up this abandoned base, or is it because you can't bear to part with other things? Yang Jianhua was stunned for a moment. He slightly loosened his hand and looked at him, asking, What do you mean? Long Yubai pushed him away, then turned around and walked out of the conference hall without saying a word. He no longer had the patience to waste any more time with this man. If it wasn't for the fact that he was a level 6 ability user and could help him do a lot of things, Yang Jianhua would have directly fallen out with him. Yang Jianhua had directly fallen out with him. Long Yubai was a smart man. He didn't have the ability to create and manage a base, but he would find someone to manage it. Especially those who loved him so much that they were infatuated with him. He would use their willingness to do things for him. And Yang Jianhua was one of them. In fact, Long Yubai didn't contribute much to the establishment of the Earth Dragon base. It could be said that it was built as a gift from someone else. However, Yang Jianhua wasn't a devoted person. He was only interested in her. He only wanted to get his hands on everything. He was already on his side, but he still dared to be reluctant to part with Lin Wenwen. Did he really think that he didn't know? Looking at Long Yubai's figure walking out of the door, Yang Jianhua just had a gloomy face. After an entire week, Lin Xiao woke up from her still state of consciousness. When she woke up, she found that it was still dark in front of her, and she couldn't see anything. But soon she felt the changes in her body and around her. She felt that little man's energy had filled her whole body. Every cell and blood was filled with this kind of healing and nourishing energy. She also felt a burst of hunger coming from her stomach. This feeling made her subconsciously swallow her saliva. Lin Xiao felt a bit strange. Why did she feel hungry? After she became a zombie, she had been drinking lake water and using the energy in the water to maintain her hunger. After that, she didn't have this kind of feeling. What was going on now? And the surroundings were filled with little man's energy. But Lin Xiao found it strange that there was no little man's aura around her. Huh? Little man, are you still there? Lin Xiao shouted in her heart. If she guessed correctly, she should still be at the bottom of the lake. This state where her whole body was wrapped in energy, although it was a bit different from before. But thinking about the previous situation, she still knew her situation. Mama, you finally woke up. Little man's message came from Lin Xiao's mind. Lin Xiao asked in her heart. Where are you? Why can't I feel your aura? Are you still in the lake? Little man's message was a bit erratic. Mama, little man has now finished upgrading. Where am I? And then little man is in Mama's stomach. Lin Xiao felt even more strange. Inside her stomach? How did it run into her stomach? What was the meaning of this? She couldn't help but ask. Why are you in my stomach? You're so big, how can you get into my stomach? Little man replied. Actually, the little man that Mama saw before were only formed by energy. Little man didn't have a physical body, this time, because I wanted to upgrade Mama and resurrect her body. Little man poured all of its energy into Mama's body. Little man didn't have any energy to rely on, so it could only get into Mama's stomach. You don't have a physical body? Lin Xiao was a bit shocked. Little man actually didn't have a physical body. Were all the vines she saw before energy bodies? Chapter 387. Lin Xiao suddenly remembered that she was raped by a man, and it was caused by this little man. Could it be? Could it be because of this that little man brought a man in for her? Then, while tricking the two of them into making a human, she put herself into her stomach. Lin Xiao was confused and asked in surprise, Little man, you didn't run into my womb, did you? Are you going to become my baby? After she asked, she immediately heard little man's excited voice in her mind. Did Mama guess it? Yes, little man is now in Mama's stomach, and she has already caught Mama's little egg and Papa's little tadpole, and then combined them together. Now they have become little man's body, but they are still very, very small. Lin Xiao was speechless. Fuck. After getting little man's affirmative answer, Lin Xiao felt very uncomfortable. Wait a minute. Wasn't she a zombie? She was already a dead person, how could she still get pregnant? She couldn't help saying, "Little man, are you kidding me?" Little man asked strangely, "Little man is not kidding, Mama." Lin Xiao still couldn't believe it and said, "Then why are you in my stomach? I am already a zombie. How can I still have a baby?" Even if she was slept with by a man, it was impossible for her to win the bid, right? And she got it on the first try? Did the probability have to be so 100%? Little man said, "Because little man has used all her energy to help Mama resurrect. Because Mama needs a man to stimulate her during the resurrection. So little man asked Mama to find a man to come in. And now little man has used all her energy to help Mama resurrect and upgrade. Little man has no energy to maintain her original form, so she had to run into Mama's stomach. Anyway, Papa's little tadpole is here." He. It meant that little man had used all her energy to maintain her original form to help Lin Xiao repair and activate her body. In the end, she needed a man in the process, and he had to do that kind of thing. Lin Xiao felt that it was for her own good. But why did she feel that this child was a bit too much to cheat her mother? She didn't know how to react. Xiao Lin was a little confused. So you brought a man in for me? Moreover, he had secretly gotten it in. Why didn't you tell me first? Also, who was that man? Little man replied, because Tiny Tot likes Mama very much. She said that she wants Mama to be her mama, so that man is Tiny Tot's papa. Lin Xiao. Who are you talking about? Little man. Tiny's daddy. Lin Xiao. Come out, I'm going to kill you. Oh my God. Of all people, why did you have to trick that man? That man had already been cheated by Lu Tianyu once. And this time he was cheated by her again. Apui. It was all because of little man. Moreover, she had also been cheated. Thinking back, that man seemed to be conscious at that time, and he clearly knew it was her. Only she didn't know who he was. No, she was raped this time. At that time she was the one who couldn't resist at all, not him. Little man replied shyly, "Ah, Mama. Calm down. If you get too excited and lose me, then little man will be dead." Lose? Lin Xiao. She really needed some peace and quiet. Be quiet. Be quiet. Important things have to be said 3 times. Ah, be quiet the hell. This damn vine. Of all men, why did it have to be Wu Changyue, that smiling fox? Lin Xiao gritted her teeth and said in her heart, "You're so awesome that you even created your own body. Are you still afraid that I'll lose you? The union of a zombie and a human, how did you do it? Come out and tell me clearly." At this time, her heart was simply filled with mixed feelings. She was angry, surprised, happy, and also tricked again. She was angry that little man had done such an important thing for her first. She didn't even discuss it with her beforehand, in case something happened. Then wouldn't little man, who had lost her energy, be in danger? Also, what if she did that with that man but she didn't win the bid? Then where was little man going to find a carrier to carry her? And wait a minute, how could she forget that when that man spurted out at the end? He seemed to have spurted out a lot? Little man said carefully, "Because Mama, you don't seem to like Tiny Tot's papa. And I'm afraid that if I tell you, what if you don't agree? Tiny Tot will cry." Lin Xiao thought, indeed, if little man dared to tell her in advance that the man she was looking for was surnamed Wu, then she definitely wouldn't do it. She held her breath and said, "So you tricked your mama, right? And even got raped by him. What method did you use to get him in here? And if he's a normal person, he shouldn't do this kind of thing to me casually. What did you do to him?" Little man said, because little man leveled up, although little man can't go out, but I can release the energy of my body through Mama, so I pulled Tiny Tot's papa in." After saying that, little man paused for a moment and then said, "And after coming in, little man didn't do anything to him. She just released a scent that would have reproductive cues for him to smell. Then he could enter that state." Reproductive cues? Was there such a thing? And this was an aphrodisiac? So he knew that he couldn't control his own body even when he was conscious. So at this time, little man sent her naked into his arms. If this wasn't throwing herself into his arms, what was it? Although she was the one who was sent. So the current situation was that little man made use of their human-making activity to create her. This time, she really became a living baby. Lin Xiao couldn't help but ask, "So you're really staying in my womb now? You resurrected my identity as a human, and then you ran in and squatted in my stomach? You didn't even tell me in advance." Do you know that you're lying to me? The more she spoke, the angrier she became, and Lin Xiao's tone also became bad. Seeming to feel that Lin Xiao was really angry, little Man immediately said coquettishly, "Woo, Mama, I was wrong. Don't be angry. I won't dare to do it again." Lin Xiao said angrily, "Now that you know you're wrong, why didn't you tell me before?" Little Man said with some grievance, "Woo, because I was afraid that Mama wouldn't agree with Tiny Tot's papa." Chapter 388. Hearing Little Man's aggrieved voice, Lin Xiao still couldn't get angry. After all, Little Man had been with her for a long time, and Lin Xiao knew that she could be a little willful sometimes. But she was doing it for her own good. Thinking of this, Lin Xiao's anger slowly subsided. After thinking for a while, Lin Xiao asked, "What's the condition of my body now? Hasn't it been repaired yet?" She wanted to touch her body, but she couldn't move her hands. Seeing that she changed the topic, Little Man immediately breathed a sigh of relief and replied, "Mama's body has been activated now, but only 1/3 of the heart has been activated, and 2/3 of it is still not alive. Now I just need to wait for Mama's body to absorb Little Man's energy, and then I can go out." Lin Xiao asked in surprise, "Is my heart alive?" She didn't expect that Little Man would come back to life and save her heart. Lu Tianyu's body had been dead for a few months, but now it could still be resurrected. Little Man was really amazing. Little Man replied, Well, it also needs Mama's own energy, Papa's energy, and Little Man's energy to activate it. Mama may still need to absorb for 2 days before she can go up." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "Okay, 2 more days? How long have I been down?" Little Man counted. It seems to be 8 days." Lin Xiao sighed. It seemed that she still had to wait for 2 more days. But when she thought of how to face Wu Chongyue in the future, she didn't know. It would be fine if he didn't know who she was, but he clearly knew who she was. If they met, it would be very awkward. Although both of them were cheated, it was not voluntary. So it was better not to meet. If he knew that her body was Lu Tianyu, it would be even more fun. After she went out, she'd better slip away quickly. She would go to the new base to see the situation. If everything went well, she would leave for the south and avoid Wu Chongyue. She said in her heart, "Little Man, if you have such a big thing in the future, you must tell me first, okay? If you are really my child, I won't care about your butt in the future." Seeing that she had stopped pursuing it, Little Man replied happily, "Little Man knows that I was wrong, and I won't dare to do it in the future." "Chow Lin, that's good. That's right. Does he know that I won the bid this time? You didn't tell him, did you?" Little Man. Lin Xiao had a bad feeling. What was with this silence? "Oh, don't tell me you told him too." If Little Man was standing in front of her, her 2 little fingers should be pointing at each other at this moment, and then she would feel a little wronged. Little Man doesn't have hands. She should be poking him with her vines. I told him." Little Man told Papa everything. Lin Xiao broke down. "Why did you tell him? This way he will definitely come and pester me. How dare you call her Papa? Oh my God." She wanted to let that man know that she was pregnant with his child, and that the child was Little Man who had cheated them. Would he let them go? As if now was not the time to pursue who was right and who was wrong. Anyway, the last time it was not her but Lu Tianyu. But now that she had accepted Lu Tianyu's body, she had also accepted her sins. So this time she had been cheated by the brat and raped by Wu Chongyue again. Lin Xiao already had a premonition that the following days would be disrupted by Wu Chongyue. Lin Xiao was already in a bad state, and she continued to break down. Little Man said, "But he is already Little Man's papa." Lin Xiao. Could she beat this brat to death? Wasn't this completely betraying her as a mother? Little Man who had sensed her thoughts. What should she do? She didn't dare to go out now. If she went out, she would be beaten by Mama. Just like that, Lin Xiao and Little Man stayed at the bottom of the lake for another 2 days. On the other side, Wu Chongyue asked Xiao Liqing to investigate, and finally found some clues about the female zombie. "You said that the person who did this is on Leader Zhou's side?" Wu Chongyue sat on the sofa with Wu Yueling in his arms, and looked up at him with some surprise. Xiao Liqing stood in the open space in front of him and nodded. "Yes, it's that Kong Qingming. He has been secretly obstructing our investigation." Wu Chungyue touched his chin strangely and asked, "Why does he want to obstruct us from investigating the background of that zombie? Is there any inside story?" Xiao Liqing shook his head, thought for a moment and guessed. Is it because he wants to protect Miss Lu? After all, didn't Miss Lu save them in Hangzhou last time? Maybe he thinks that we are going to do something bad to her. Wu Chungyue looked at him and said, "What else can we do to her? Aren't we in a cooperative relationship now? Does he think that I am that kind of person with a bad character? He helped me, so why would I go and harm others?" Xiao Liqing shrugged and said, "I think we have to ask him himself." Wu Chungyue carried Wu Yueling on the ground and stood up. "All right, since he knows something, then let's go." "Okay, since he knows something, then we can go talk to him directly. There's no need to spend so much effort to investigate. If he doesn't want to say, then we can only ask Old Zhou to do it." Xiao Liqing didn't think that he would ask Kong Qingming directly. He looked at him in a daze. "Ah!" Wu Chungyue glanced at him and pulled Wu Yueling out. "What are you talking about? Let's go." "Where is he now?" Xiao Liqing came back to his senses and immediately followed. "Yes. On the other side, lying on the sofa in Lu Tiany's office." Kong Qingming frowned and said, I can't stop the information about your sister. Moreover, they might have already noticed us. What if Leader Wu comes looking for us? What are you going to do?" Then he looked at Lu Tiany, who was sitting at the desk. Lu Tiany stopped writing and looked up in a daze. Then he thought for a moment before looking at Kong Qingming and said, "If he really comes, then I think we can ask him why he is here. Why does he keep chasing after my sister? What is his intention?" Kong Qingming was stunned and then looked at him strangely. "You're asking him directly? How dare you?" At this time, the guard outside the door knocked and came in. "Minister Leader Wu is here." Lu Tiany and Kong Qingming. "Speak of the devil." The two looked at each other and quickly stood up. Then they saw Wu Chungyue walk in with Wu Yueling, followed by Xiao Liqing and 2 soldiers. "Leader, why are you here?" Lu Tiany looked at Wu Chungyue and greeted him. Wu Chungyue smiled and said, "Why? Am I not allowed to come?" Lu Tiany said awkwardly, No. It's just that I'm a little flattered by the leader's sudden arrival. Please sit." The two of them retreated and then invited Wu Chungyue to sit on the sofa. Wu Chungyue pulled Lingling to sit on the sofa, and then waved at the two of them to sit on the sofa next to them. "You two sit down too. Let's talk." Chapter 389. Lu Tiany and Kong Qingming looked at each other with a bad expression. Then Lu Tiany turned around to pour some water, while Kong Qingming sat down nervously. Wu Chungyue turned around and glanced at Xiao Liqing. Xiao Liqing understood and left with 2 soldiers. After everyone had left, there were only Wu Chungyue, Lu Tiany, Kong Qingming, and a tiny tot in the office. Wu Chungyue smiled at the two and said, "I heard that you two are obstructing my people. I want to know what's going on." Lu Tiany poured a few glasses of water and placed them on the table. He had just sat down when he heard Wu Chungyue's words. Then he pretended to look at Wu Chungyue and asked, "Hey, what is it that you're talking about? Do we have a problem with the leader?" A strange light flashed in Wu Chungyue's eyes, which were already smiling. Then, as if dissatisfied, he joked, "All right, you're playing dumb, aren't you? Little Kong, why don't you tell him?" After saying that, he suddenly looked at Kong Qingming and said to him, "Ah." Kong Qingming didn't expect that his conversation with Lu Tiany would suddenly turn to his side. He was unable to react for a moment. Wu Chungyue said, "What are you talking about? Why didn't you let my men investigate Miss Lu? Are you guys protecting her? Why?" Being asked so bluntly, Kong Qingming didn't know how to answer for a moment. He turned to look at Lu Tiany. Lu Tiany asked, "Then can we know why the leader suddenly wants to investigate her? If you give us a good reason, maybe we can tell you what we know about her." The smile on Wu Chungyue's face became a little unpredictable. "Because I'm very interested in her now, can't I?" Lu Tiany and Kong Qingming looked at each other in silence. Wu Chungyue turned his head and patted Lingling. He sighed and said, "Originally, I didn't plan on announcing this, so you guys have to help me keep it a secret." Lu Tiany's eyes lit up. Oh, was he going to tell her what he was trying to do? He didn't expect it to be so fast. They didn't expect that Wu Chengyue would actually tell them. They were indeed a little surprised. Wu Chengyue said, I'm going to ask her to be Lingling's stepmother, which means I want her to be my wife. So it's not too much for me to investigate her information, right? Lu Tianyi and the other man were dumbfounded. Dumbfounded, she looked at him with a look of disbelief. Wait. Leader, what did you just say? I didn't hear you clearly. Lu Tianyi quickly raised his hand to Wu Chengchao and said with a shocked face. After a few seconds of shock, Kong Qingming's expression became strange. Wu Chengyue looked at his confused expression and said with some amusement, I said I want her to be my wife. What's wrong? No. After hearing him say it again, Lu Tianyi refused fiercely without thinking. Wu Chengyue was stunned by his attitude, then looked at him with a subtle expression and asked, why? You shouldn't have any relationship with her. Ed, don't tell me you've also fallen for her? Puffed. This was Kong Qingming, who had just reacted and picked up the cup of water in front of the table to take a sip. Puffed. This was Lu Tianyi, who seemed to have said something wrong, and then also picked up the cup of water to cover up the embarrassment. When the two heard Wu Chengyue's last sentence, they directly spat. Ahem. Both of them wiped their mouths awkwardly. No. Ahem. Lu Tianyi put down the cup and reached out to stop Wu Chengyue. He said anxiously, Isn't it? Otherwise, why were you so excited just now? Turns out that you like someone older than you. But do you know her real identity? The smile on Wu Chengyue's face became a little strange. No. Leader, don't misunderstand. It's not what you said. Lu Tianyi was misunderstood by him like this. He quickly waved his hand and shook his head to clarify. Chapter 390. Wu Chengyue was also a capable leader. He didn't notice the complicated expressions of the two just now. At this time he also noticed something was wrong. His eyes flashed. After looking at Lu Tianyi, he looked at Kong Qingming. Suddenly he stared at the two and asked, The expressions of the two of you tell me. Something seems to be wrong. I slept with that female zombie. Why are you all so shocked? Do you know her identity and background? Originally, he wanted to say that he slept with the female zombie, but when he thought that Lingling was next to him, he changed his words and asked. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming both looked at each other. They knew that the female zombie was Lu Tianyi, and they also felt that if Wu Chengyue continued to investigate like this, he would eventually find out. Therefore, they also understood that their previous obstruction was only temporary. But they didn't expect Kong Qingming's ability to stop Wu Chengyue for so long. The two hesitated for a moment, then cautiously said to Wu Chengyue, Actually, what we care about is not that you slept with her, but, well, it's really a little surprising. How did you end up in a relationship with her? When? Is there any special reason? Wu Chengyue smiled and said, Of course I can't tell you the reason, unless you tell me all about her background. As for how I had this kind of relationship with her, this is not important. The important thing is that she belongs to me now. Not only do I have to be responsible for her, but she also has to be responsible for me. The other two. Seeing Wu Chengyue's attitude was so firm, he didn't know that the person he was talking about was Lu Tianyi, who was hated by everyone in the base and had raped him. What expression would he have? Lu Tianyi suddenly looked forward to the other party's reaction. He said, Are you sure you want to know her real identity? Her identity before she became a zombie. Kong Qingming looked at Lu Tianyi and asked him with his eyes, Do you really want to say it? Lu Tianyi looked back at him. He would know sooner or later. Kong Qingming thought for a moment and said, Then I'll go first. Lu Tianyi, don't go. If we die together. Wu Chengyue looked at the exchange of eyes between the two, and his eyes also deepened. He said, Does it matter? Is her identity complicated or scary? Kong Qingming looked at him and said, When you find out her identity later, don't get angry. Lu Tianyi nodded and said in agreement, Leader, if you want to get angry later, then don't. Wait until we get out of here before you go crazy. Wu Chengyue was a little confused by their conversation. He asked curiously, Why should I be mad? What was going on? You two are acting weird. Lu Qianni said. Leader, you have to promise me first, then I will say it. Wu Chengyue simply agreed, okay, I got it. Besides, I won't go crazy for no reason. You all know what kind of person I am. I know what kind of person you are. You're the scariest when you're angry, okay? The other two remained silent. Seeing that he agreed, Lu Qianni said, think about it. Her surname is Lu. And it's already dead. Turning into a zombie is also an accident. Wu Chengyue nodded and looked at him. And then? Lu Qianni swallowed his saliva and slowly continued. My surname is also Lu. You know, I was looking for you before. A trace of doubt flashed in Wu Chengyue's eyes, and his expression froze. Then he thought about it. Both surnamed Lu? This kid went to look for him before, and it seemed to be just that one time. He asked him where Lu Qianyu died and said that he was going to find her body. That was a long time ago. Surnamed Lu? Wu Chengyue thought about it and suddenly realized something. He suddenly stared at Lu Qianni and said, you said that her surname is Lu, and your surname is also Lu. Is that what you mean? You looked for me before to find your sister's body, is that right? Lu Qianni and Lu Qianni didn't dare to breathe loudly and slowly nodded. They were ready to turn around and run away at any time. Wu Chengyue looked at them and was silent for 3 seconds. Then a faint smile appeared on his face again. So you mean, she is Lu Tianyu? Right. No wonder he always felt that the face was very familiar. Now that he compared it, wasn't that her face without makeup? No wonder he felt as if he had seen it somewhere. The expressions of Lu Qianni and Lu Qianni froze for a moment. They didn't nod or make a sound. They just smiled at him strangely. Wu Chengyue's expression was very interesting. The smile on his face was stiff, and his eyes flashed with a strange light. As a result, 2 blue veins slowly appeared on his forehead. Lu Qianni and Lu Qianni both froze and didn't dare to move at all. Because Wu Chengyue's aura was a little explosive now, suppressing the whole office. The 2 of them burst into tears in their hearts. Liar! Didn't you say you wouldn't go crazy? What are you doing now? What are you doing? This is even scarier, okay? Please put away your smile, your blue veins are popping out, okay? We'd rather see your expressionless face. Seeming to feel that the atmosphere suddenly changed, Wu Yueling, who was sensitive, looked up at Wu Chengyue. Then she rubbed against him and pulled his sleeve. Wu Chengyue's aura melted at once. He sighed and looked at Wu Yueling, asking her, what should I do, Lingling? Dad really wants to fight with someone now. Should I go look for that female zombie and fight it out? Wu Yueling looked at him blankly, not understanding what he said. Fight? Find who to fight? Didn't Dad say we can't fight? Leader. That? You already fought with her, did you forget? You also bit her thigh. Lu Qianni saw that his aura was melted by Wu Yueling's one move, and his heart immediately felt relieved. Seeing his wayward words, he couldn't help but laugh and remind him. As soon as he said that, Wu Chengyue immediately remembered that time when the female zombie snatched his zombie core, and then fought with her on the roof. The result was that he couldn't beat her. In the end, he didn't have the grace to bite the other's thigh. Hey, wait a minute, something's wrong. He suddenly stared at Lu Qianni and asked, it doesn't seem right. That woman was clearly just an ordinary person when she was in the base, and she was just a vase. Even if she became a zombie now, it's impossible for her ability to suddenly increase so much. Not to mention that her skills are like a trained professional soldier. Her current personality and ability to do things. It's also not the same as before. Don't tell me that she hid all this before. Wu Chengyue suddenly had a little hope in his heart. Hope that the 2 of them should not be the same person. It shouldn't be. Chapter 391. Lu Qianni looked at him sympathetically, but said, this leader. She didn't deny her identity. In fact, you can ask her directly. But your current relationship? That's a bit complicated. Previously, Lu Tianyu raped Wu Chengyue and was killed. She even put the blame on Wu Chengyue. Now she died and became a zombie, but she also changed into another person's appearance and ran back to cause a lot of trouble. Then she was raped by Wu Chengyue, and now Wu Chengyue is responsible for her? Well, who is responsible for who? Well, in that case, the 2 of them are even. Wu Chonghua thought about it and suddenly said, "It's really not right. Her current personality is completely different from before. It's impossible that even her personality changed after becoming a zombie. Right? Her body is still. Okay. It seems that little Man said that her body was restored to its original form by energy, which means that her body was reconstructed once. Lu Tianyi said, we also suspected it at the beginning, but we really didn't find her body at that time. And I was very familiar with her appearance without makeup before the doomsday. It's impossible to mistake her face now." Wu Chonghua smiled coldly and said, "Then she actually dared to come back. Isn't she afraid of being recognized by me?" Kong Qingming said at this time, "Hey leader, then aren't you even now? Previously she raped you and this time you've eaten her clean. Just nice, no one needs to be responsible for anyone. And the matter is solved. Let the past be the past. Leader, you don't need to marry his sister. You're back, right?" Even if Wu Chonghua now knew that the female zombie's name was Lu Tianyu, he didn't think about going back on his words from just now until now. In other words, he didn't want to give up the idea of marrying her. It was because he didn't give up that he was in a bad state now. He didn't expect it to be that woman because he didn't expect them to be together at all. The difference was so big that even if he knew her surname was Lu, he never thought of that woman. Now, it was completely out of his expectations. Thinking about the current Lu Tianyu, she seemed to have become another person after becoming a zombie. Not only did he save Lingling a few times, but he also didn't do anything reckless anymore. He even brought people to build a new base. This was definitely not something the previous Lu Tianyu would do. Wu Chonghua suddenly remembered the first time he saw her in her zombie form. At that time, she was about to send Lingling back to him. In the end, he was quick enough to strike her with a bolt of lightning, sending her running away. He had also taken Lingling away with him. Now that he thought about it, she had used Lingling to threaten him to do that. He didn't expect that she would still want to send Lingling back to him after she died. Could it be that he suddenly found his conscience? Or did something happen to her when she died that made her wake up? Hearing Kong Qingming's words, Lu Tianyi suddenly came to his senses. He hurriedly said, "That's right. Leader, now that you know her identity, you probably won't marry her anymore. After all, she used to be hated by everyone." However, Wu Chonghua looked at them in surprise and said, "Why don't you let me marry her? I didn't say I was going to give up. Even if I know who she is now, I should still consider whether she will change back to her original appearance. But I don't plan on not marrying her. I still have to take her back to my bed to warm it. And now it's just right. She forced me last time and I forced her this time. So she is responsible for me last time, and I am responsible for her this time. It's just right to marry her." They didn't expect Wu Chonghua to insist on marrying Lu Tianyu. Lu Tianyi looked at him in surprise. "Then, how are you going to face each other in the future?" Lu Tianyi thought of this and asked uneasily. Wu Chonghua smiled and said, "What? Are you afraid that I will abuse her? So that's why you stopped me from investigating her background. I thought you were protecting her. You must have fallen in love with her." Lu Tianyi said awkwardly, "Leader, you think too much." "Well, I already know what I want to know." Wu Chonghua stood up at this time and continued, "I've also told you the reason. I still have something to do, so I'll leave first. You're going to be my brother-in-law in the future. Don't you think it's wonderful?" He patted Lu Tianyi on the shoulder, then took Lingling and walked out. Then two young men with blank expressions were left behind. Kong Qingming watched his back disappear and suddenly said, "You say? I haven't seen Sister Lu appear recently. Could she be afraid of being entangled by the leader? So she's hiding?" Lu Tianyi's expression was very subtle when Wu Chonghua called him brother-in-law. When he heard Kong Qingming's words, he came back to his senses. She hasn't appeared yet? Could she have already gone to their new base? Kong Qingming shook his head and said, "I sent someone over there to see. But the news that came back was a bit strange. It said that their new base seemed to be surrounded by a group of zombies, and they were not allowed to enter. And those zombies seem to be controlled and won't attack people casually. I think it should be your sister who is controlling them. She might have already gone over there." Lu Tianyi thought about it and said, "That should be it. But she actually thought of using zombies to protect the base. It's really strange." Kong Qingming crossed his arms in front of his chest, raised one hand to touch his chin, and asked with some doubt, you say, when Leader Wu did exercise with Sister Lu this time, didn't he feel a little familiar? After all, this is the second time. Lu Qianni looked at him and said, last time she took the initiative. This time she should be passive, so the feeling must be different. Besides, the leader didn't think that she was the previous Lu Qianyu, so it should be impossible to feel that they are the same person. Kong Qingming felt that it was reasonable and nodded. That's true. And Wu Chengyue, who walked out of Lu Qianni's office, needed to go back and calm down. He actually fucked that woman back. Fucked her. It was the first time after the other party's body was repaired and he took it off. Now it was great he broke her body. Although he didn't have to take responsibility, his character didn't allow him to do so. This time, although he was trapped, he felt that he couldn't control himself and forced himself to do it with the other party. There was still a little guilt in his heart, but now it was all good, the guilt was gone. That woman shouldn't think of running away this time. Even if she became a zombie, she was still his zombie. What's more, she might be pregnant with his child. How could he let her go? Chapter 392. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who didn't know that her identity had been betrayed again, finally absorbed all of little man's energy into her body after 2 days of absorption. When she found that the light around her was getting brighter and brighter, she found that she was still at the bottom of the lake. After her body could move, Lin Xiao immediately swam up. As she swam, she suddenly saw a few strands of black hair floating in front of her eyes. She froze for a moment, then touched her head with her hand as she swam up. The hair that she had been nurturing was gone, and her fingers were all inserted into the soft long hair. Then she moved her head forward and took a look. Sure enough, it had grown out. Her hair. Seeing that her hair had suddenly grown longer, Lin Xiao's mood immediately became much better. She swam down at an accelerated pace. She didn't know why she felt so free in the lake now. She didn't need to use too much strength in her movements, but she could easily swim far and fast. Moreover, the energy in the lake gave her a very comfortable feeling. After a while, Lin Xiao swam to the surface of the water. Poof! Her head popped out. She looked around, a trace of doubt flashed in her eyes, and then swam to the shore. As if feeling her breath, Shen Yuzhen, who was in the small space, slowly walked out at this time. She looked in Lin Xiao's direction with doubt in her eyes. She clearly felt that Lin Xiao's breath had changed, and the smell on her body had also changed, becoming sweet and tempting. But Lin Xiao's breath had become more frightening, as if her level had increased again. From her original breath, there was also the breath of the heavenly vine at the bottom of the lake. The two were mixed together and there was another breath in it. Anyway, now Lin Xiao's breath gave her a sense of oppression several times stronger than before. Shen Yuzhen watched Lin Xiao slowly walk out of the lake, then picked up the clothes on the chair by the lake and began to put them on. She looked at Lin Xiao's long hair in surprise. How could her hair grow so long after being down there for only 10 days? It was only a long level. Could she grow her hair too? After Lin Xiao put on the clothes, she looked at her hands and touched her wet hair. Then she touched her eyes. She didn't notice that her eyes had turned from black to white, and then there was a green pupil in the middle. It made her look like someone from the West, except that she had an Asian face. She put the contact lenses back into her eyes. Actually, she didn't need it anymore. She just hadn't realized it yet. Lin Xiao noticed Shen Yuzhen's gaze. Even though the two of them were separated by a long distance, Lin Xiao could still sense her emotions. Suspicion, confusion, fear, obedience. All sorts of emotions could be felt from afar. There was also the same feeling of fear and avoidance in the forest on the other side. Even from afar it could be heard. She walked up and walked towards the sofa area where Shen Yuzhen was. Then he asked, "What's wrong? What are you afraid of?" After saying that, she was stunned. That was because her voice was much better. It was no longer the hoarse, rough, and unpleasant voice from before. It was a normal female voice, crisp and melodious. Shen Yuzhen was stunned when she heard her voice. He didn't expect her voice to recover as well. She walked towards Lin Xiao and looked at her carefully. Lin Xiao could sense her thoughts. Then he nodded and said, "Well, it can be considered an upgrade." Moreover, his body had recovered and even been reactivated. However, only half of it has been activated. The other half might take a long time to activate. She touched her belly, because Little Man told her that on the day Little Man was born, her body would be fully activated. Moreover, Little Man had also said that it would be the most dangerous time. Shen Yuzhen looked at her and nodded. Lin Xiao asked her, "I'm ready to go out into the new base. Are you still not willing to go out and see Chen Yuding?" Hearing her mention Chen Yuding, Shen Yuzhen shook her head. Then he opened his mouth and said something without making a sound. Lin Xiao looked at her with some surprise and said, "Hey? Have you thought it through? Actually, you should have understood it long ago. If he would mind your current appearance, then he would have already left. If he cares about your current appearance, he won't kneel down and beg me to turn you into a zombie. Don't you believe in your feelings?" Shen Yuzhen shook her head gently, then nodded. Lin Xiao sighed and said to her, "Then I'll take you there. I'll let you out when we get there." Shen Yuzhen looked at her expectantly and nodded. Lin Xiao flashed out of the space and then appeared in the room where Lin Wenwen used to be in High City. She sniffed and found that there was no smell of Lin Wenwen, Yuan Tianxing, and the others. There was only a little smell left over from a few days ago. However, there was still the smell of Du Yuanxing and 2 soldiers in the opposite room. Now there were only the 3 of them. From these faint smells, Lin Xiao felt that Yuan Tianxing and the others should have already left High City and went to the new base in Hangzhou City. Lin Xiao looked at the surrounding doors and windows and found that they were all locked. The sky outside was bright, and it seemed to be afternoon. She didn't open the door, but opened the door to the balcony. Then she found that she could do anything even if she was invisible. Apart from releasing her abilities, she could even kill people with her claws. So right now, she was most suitable for assassination and sneak attacks. She gently turned the lock on the door and then pushed it open. She felt the surrounding auras and found that there were several auras hidden in the dark. She didn't know what their intentions were, but they should be staring at this room. So Lin Xiao pushed the door open very slowly and very gently. It was as if she was being blown by the wind. Anyway, no one could see her now. After coming out, she pushed the door back. Then she directly jumped out from the balcony and instantly reached the roof of another building. Even under the sun, she didn't have a shadow. This feeling made Lin Xiao feel like she was a ghost, coming and going without a trace. It was broad daylight here and there was no shadow. She thought that after her body returned to human form, these skills might not be able to be used. But she didn't expect that these skills and abilities wouldn't be affected at all. After landing on a tree, she used the transparent black fingernails that popped out of her fingers to grab at the fork of the tree. Gotcha! There was a soft sound, and the branch on the fork of the tree broke. Lin Xiao turned around and left the tree, then jumped onto the electric pole. Then she jumped towards the mechanism building, and then walked along the corner of the wall to the side of the building. There were people coming and going in the hall, but no one noticed her existence. Lin Xiao didn't stay and directly went to the mission office. After a while, she walked around the mission office and observed the recruitment work of Du Yuanxing and the others. Seeing that there was nothing out of the ordinary, she turned around and left, heading in a direction where there was no one. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.